Hi, Guy. Tonight, we stand on the castle walls. In this winter, just thinking about it makes your teeth ache. Imagine the stone under your boots being smoothed by frost, the kind that sparkles in the pale moonlight that feels more like ice on your skin. The air is so sharp that you can almost tear it in half. With every breath you take, it vanishes before your eyes like a ghostly cloud. You switch from one foot to the other, trying to keep your toes feeling, even though your boots are as stiff as frozen rebark. You want to believe that this fortress will protect your safety, but ironically, what killed you tonight was not an arrow, not a sword, nor boiling oil, because it's too cold. If you lack creativity, you may not be able to survive. So, before you feel comfortable, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the video, but only if you really enjoy what I'm doing here. If you are listening now, please leave a comment and tell me where you are in the world and what time it is. I always like to see how far these little stories can be passed down. Now, dim the lights. You press your palm against the edge of the battlements. The chill has returned. It seeps into your bones faster than you can't pull it out. This was the first lesson that medieval soldiers learned after going through great hardships. Stones are ruthless in winter. Unlike wood, which has a softer and more insulating quality, stone absorbs heat like a thief. Castles are masterpieces of defense, but not comfort. The thick walls block the arrows from entering, but they also block the moisture, the air current and the coldness that lingered for a long time after the sun set. A mainstream fact about these fortresses is that most of them were built for defense, rather than for living. They are the machines of war, carved from granite or limestone, with towering battlements, fortresses and murder holes. However, the soldiers sleeping in the garrison found that their design placed more emphasis on survival during the siege, rather than comfortable nights. A chronicler in the 13th century spoke frankly, saying that these stones worked older than the hearts of our enemies. This sounds poetic, but when you shiver at 3 in the morning, it feels like a bitter truth. However, you still adapt it. You start walking along the wall. This narrow path extends along the top of the curtain wall. Every guard before you did this. Place your heels on the stone and rhythmically synchronize with your numb limbs. Part is responsibility, part is despair. If you stop moving, you will freeze. The beacon fires below were burning very low, but you couldn't feel their warmth. For only your own exercise can generate enough heat to prevent your muscles from being locked up. Here is a strange gossip. Some troops stationed there have a little trick. When the frost is particularly severe, they will fill their mouths with pebbles. Of course not for eating, but to make their mouths drool as they pace. Constant swallowing gives a warm illusion, preventing the throat from feeling dry in the cold night air. It sounds absurd now, but when your lips split open and the wind cuts like a knife, any ritual feels like redemption. You pulled your cloak tight. The wool is against the flax, and the flax is against the skin, layer upon layer like an onion. However, the cold still seeped in through the cracks. You glanced at the yard, where the soldiers on duty were huddled together, digging holes under shared blankets and muttering to themselves in their sleep. Their breaths rose from the haze above their heads, just like steam coming out of a big pot. You envy them, but even if they are not feeling well, it's just a little less pain than you. Historians are still debating whether medieval castles were really as unbearable in winter as described in the chronicles, or whether this image has been exaggerated over time to highlight the suffering of soldiers. After all, people in the Middle Ages were far more accustomed to the cold than most of us today. There is no central heating system, no double-glazed glass, and no thermostat when frost comes. The threshold for discomfort may be even higher. However, it is hard to imagine that anyone could fully adapt to a night when even the ink in the ink bottle freezes. The sound tonight is very low. The creaking of your boots, the occasional chirping of owls, and the moaning of moving wood in the castle. In the distance in the forest, invisible creatures were rustling. Perhaps it was a wolf traveling through the snow, its ears pricked by the smell of human flesh on the wall. This possibility will make you hold the spear tightly. It's a bit tight here, but deep down in your heart, you know that the cold is the greater predator here. The smell is damp stones, faint smoke and the pungent smell of old torch resin. The wind blew through the battlements, and the torches crackled with a crackling sound. The light emitted by the torches was more tense and stable. Every flash makes the shadow leap, so even in silence, you will feel that you are not alone. Perhaps this is superstition, perhaps it's exhaustion, that many soldiers believe that cold can bring souls. Ghosts float in from the dark woods, or braves outside the church. It is rumored in the community that they rode the wind upwards and placed their cold hands on the living. You will tremble, not just because of the temperature. Your fingers have become numb and stiff on your wooden handle. You blow hot air into your hands, rub them together, and then stuff them under your arms. It is helpful, but only temporarily. The body is a stubborn crucible that refuses to withdraw, for the castle is a more stubborn refrigerator, taking away your heat bit by bit. However, night after night, the soldiers endured this torment, for if you left your post without permission, the punishment was often harsher than frostbite. It's better to risk freezing your toes than to be whipped or worse, hanged. You stopped, leaned against the railing and gazed at the outside world. The fields are covered with white snow, which glows slightly under the starlight. The small houses in the village lay quietly, their roofs covered with frost, and smoke was faintly rising from one or two chimneys. The farmers persisted in their survival rituals. In some strange way, you have a sense of closeness with them, whether it's the castle soldiers or the children of the peasants. Everyone is locked in a battle against the merciless cold tonight. As you continue to pace slowly, you realize that this is just the beginning of a long night. Survival requires more than just endurance. This requires levels, skills, strange beliefs, and sometimes pure luck. That now, as you keep going, every step echoes in the frosty silence. With each breath taken, another cloud vanished into the black sky. You finally stepped down from the battlements, and your boots made a clicking sound on the spiral staircase leading deep into the castle. The stones in the stairwell show no mercy. They seemed colder than the night air, with each step echoing like a drum in an empty shaft. When you reach the guard room below, this relief is immediate, but only relative. This room is also well minus ventilated, but it blocks the strongest wind. Your survival depends less on your pace and more on what you dress. Layer. Endless layers. This is a secret that every soldier firmly believes in. You pulled off your stiff gloves and glanced at the others who were already lying on the tray. They are more like bundles of cloth than men wrapped in linen undershirts, woolen long shirts, and capes draped over their shoulders. Sometimes, they even tie spare hoses around their arms, just to be a little warmer. You join them in the ceremony, unfasten your coat, shake it out, and then snort and wrap it tightly around yourself. A mainstream fact about medieval clothing is that soldiers often wore multiple pieces of clothing at the same time, far more than you could imagine from mannequins in museums. Linen is a close-fitting garment. It is chosen not for warmth, but for hygiene. It could be easier to clean, although in the Middle Ages, easy meant boiling or pounding in a cold stream. Above were wool, a coat, a hoe and a thick cloak. Wool is king in Europe, not only because it is warm even in damp conditions, but also because sheep provide a walking factory of renewable survival equipment. Woolen clothing was so precious that monarchs enacted laws to regulate the production and trade of wool. They knew that without it, the subjects skilled in winter would be more than those killed by the enemy. However, even wool has its limitations. You tossed and turned on the straw mat, feeling the chill trickling through the gap between your neck and wrist. Here is a strange gossip. Some soldiers vowed to stuff straw or even parchment into the gaps of their clothes as temporary insulating materials. This sounds desperate, and it is indeed so. But when another option stiffens like a plank before dawn, despair gives birth to creativity. Imagine the rustling sound you make as you move, which sounds like a walking haystack. However, men still did so, and some reports indicate that this approach worked surprisingly well. Your fingers groped along the edge of the cloak for the coarse fibers. Do you still remember the story of that veteran? For every additional layer of fabric folded, you can live an extra hour. Of course, this is an exaggeration. Historians are still debating whether the soldiers in the castle always had enough winter clothes, or if many of them were shivering in rags. Records show that the lords once distributed woolen cloaks to the garrison troops, but we know that even noble generosity is often weakened by poverty. The long-term shortage of textiles has led to many people having less fabric than they need. Did anyone freeze to death on their bunk? Chronicles are silent, which makes you wonder if they are too common to be mentioned. The details of your senses struck you at once. The itching of your skin caused by wool. There is still a faint smell of linseed oil lingering on the wall finders. The musty smell of a damp cloth not completely dried by the fire. Every soldier here smells bad, but you don't care. It's better to smell like a flock of sheep than to be bitten by a bare stone. You glanced around the room. A few people were still awake, rubbing their arms and cursing under low voices. One of them was carefully wrapping the extra strips of cloth around his calf. A makeshift crocodile came to prevent the air current from climbing up from his pipe legs. Another person had a piece of rags under his chin and pulled his hood tight to prevent his ears from freezing. These minor adjustments may seem insignificant, but they are the dividing line between comfort and pain. However, despite all these efforts, the cold was still not overcome. The draft through the crack of the door will find you no matter what. The window was closed, but the crack in the wall was breathing in the cold air like an invisible mouth. You trembled, wondering how many such nights there were ahead. You are trying to distract yourself by thinking, how many sheep need to be sheared to dress the defenders? How many spindles and looms are spinning in the nearby villages? There is a quiet sense of connection here. The farmers in front of the loom and the soldiers in front of the city wall were all tied together with wool. Without one the other cannot survive. The men gradually quieted down and fell into an uneasy slumber, their deep snoring sounds like low roars. This room doesn't feel much like a military camp, but more like a cocoon. Everyone is wrapped up and wrapped up again, until humanity almost vanishes beneath the layers of wrapping. You lay there too, like a cocoon, counting your breaths. You know the truth. It will be cold again tomorrow. More acute, bolder, and perhaps colder. But tonight, you must trust your linen and wool. You believe, because you must believe that layer upon layer of ice is enough to hold you down longer than the surrounding frozen stones. You woke up with a start. The damp chill was already creeping beneath your body. The room was still very dim, with only the embers in the fireplace making a faint crackling sound. You turned sideways and pulled your cape tighter, but the cold is enduring, penetrating every crevice and fold. Even so, there is one thing that makes today unique, and that is the future of sheepskin. Wool is useful, but fur is a luxury. The sheepskin cape was the most precious winter armor for the garrison and the castle. The thick and fluffy fur did not look like it was worn on a human body, but on the back of an animal. You watched one of your comrades minus arms shrug his shoulders, and the wool brushed over his neck like a stubborn pillow. It's not beautiful, but you can tell the difference immediately. His breath still rose among the white clouds, but his shoulders heaved a sigh of relief instead of trembling. A mainstream fact is that medieval Europe relied heavily on sheepskin as a by-miners product of the wool industry. When wool is woven unspun into coats and homes, the fur itself is tanned, made into cloaks or lined garments. Unlike smooth leather, sheepskin retains wool and serves as a natural insulator. Monks, farmers and soldiers all knew that fur was the true guardian against winter. As early as the Carol I period, records described a large number of sheepskin cloaks distributed to soldiers, which indicates that even kings recognized the value of fur in maintaining human life. You dragged your cloak to your lap and sighed. Your clothes are made entirely of wool, but not that fluffy wool. You might think that if you could get a precious sheepskin, how many nights would feel differently. I came up with a strange and interesting anecdote. In some regions, cloaks made of wools of bears are regarded as a symbol of prestige, but sheepskin does not have such charm. It is very ordinary and practical. Perhaps that's why soldiers attach so much importance to it. The practicality is comforting. It doesn't boast, but it's worth. You wrapped your hands in a woolen sweater and recalled the ongoing debate in the field of history. Some scholars believe that sheepskin cloaks are very abundant, with almost every soldier having one, while others claim that they are rare and reserved for officers or men who have enough money to purchase from passing merchants. As usual, the truth may lie somewhere in between. It depends on the region, wealth and luck. Were you stationed in a well-stocked border castle? Or are you trapped in some forgotten outpost, where all the people are just getting by with rags? The answer determines whether your cloak is a lifeline or a heavy burden. The sensory world of sheepskin is easy to imagine. Wool has a unique smell, mixed with a faint animal musk, which will never be washed away. It sticks to your cheek, feeling very oily and almost sticky, but there's no denying that it's wool. On a cold night, this warmth is more valuable than gold. Imagine that you put on such a cloak and feel the increase in heat. Not from fire, not from layers of fabric, but from the animal's own lingering presence. It's as if the sheep haven't left your side yet. Some soldiers were very fond of their cloaks, treating them as companions, giving them names and talking to them, as if they were talking to a trustworthy comrade. This might sound a bit strange, but in a world where loneliness and cold are equally tormenting, a cloak can be an alternative friend. Thinking of this, you smiled slightly, even though your lips were chapped. The fireplace banged and sparks flew out. A few people moved, and the sheepskin rustled gently. A person completely covered his head with the cloak and vanished beneath it like a turtle burrowing into its shell. You envy him, even if you are moving uncomfortably on your haystack. You imagine yourself walking up the battlements wrapped in wool. The cold wind is still biting, but it seems to have been softened by the wool pads. Historians sometimes wonder if soldiers would wear sheepskin cloaks over their armor while keeping watch in the dead of winter. Some statements are affirmative, although this will restrict action. Others, however, think it should not be, because the weight of the man and the plate is already sufficient without increasing the volume. Perhaps the answer varies depending on the environment. On a bitter night without a fight, a guard might wrap himself up in wool, but if danger strikes, he will take it off and trade warmth for agility. You rolled on your back, gazing at the rafters shrouded in shadow above. The castle seems to be breathing around you, exhaling damp air from invisible cracks. You thought of the flock of sheep again, those in the fields that gave birth to the cape, grazing on the quiet grassland, while people like you were shivering behind the stone wall. You wonder if they are aware of their own importance and if they know that their skin is saving distant lives. Probably not. You never think that people born in the year of the goat are philosophers. However, you still let this thought linger on because it gives people a strange sense of comfort. Survival has never been a glamorous thing. Sometimes, it is as humble as wrapping itself in the skin of another creature, thanking someone somewhere for deciding to shear wool and tan their skin for those who will never meet them. When the first faint ray of light seeped through the crack in the wall, you sat up, brushed the straw off your coat, and got ready to face another bone-chilling day. Whether you have a cape or not, whether you have wool or not, you stand up to face the early morning with a stubbornness that knows the cold will not subside. But you won't either. The day passed slowly, painfully, unbloomily. When night came again, you were so exhausted that you didn't even care where your head lay until you felt the ground. The cold stone floor is like sleeping on a block of ice. Every joint was pressing down on it, and the pain felt as if the bone marrow was about to freeze. At this point, you should thank the simplest invention minus the straw mattress. You drag your feet towards your tray, which is nothing but a bag filled with hay, box or anything you can collect. When you fall down, it wrinkles beneath you, like the sound of parchment breaking. Although it looks very primitive, it is still better than stone. You turned over and immediately felt the difference. The straw pulled you up a distance of 1 finger's width from the cold floor. Such a tiny yet so significant obstacle makes you shed tears of gratitude. A mainstream historical fact. For centuries, straw bedding has been the standard in Europe, especially for ordinary soldiers and farmers. The castle was filled with these rustling sacks, which were sometimes also called sacks. They are not luxurious, but they are indispensable. Without them, diseases would spread more easily. Overnight, my limbs stiffened and my morale plummeted. The soldiers who set out often carried empty ticket boxes and cloth bags, which contained dry grass they had picked up from where they had camped. At least in the castle, there is usually a stable or barn nearby to replenish bedding. Of course, straw also has its own quirks. You lie on your bed, scratching your neck. Within a few days, fleas and lice invaded the mattress, turning it into a wriggling swarm. This is a strange behind-the scenes story. The medieval handbooks recommended that straw be replaced or burned at least once a season, but soldiers often had to endure longer periods and continuous itching. Some people try to mix fragrant herbs, such as lavender or mugwort, to drive away pests. But these luxury goods are not always available to low-level troops stationed there. Imagine that you are trying to rest, but your bed is biting you as eagerly as cold. You pulled your cloak tighter, sat down again, and tried to ignore the scratch. Straw has an earthy smell, half comforting and half suffocating. Close your eyes and you can almost imagine yourself lying on the grass in midsummer, with warm sunlight above your head and insects buzzing lazily. For when the draft finds your cheek, reality returns. This is not grassland. This is a room made of stone, with frost all over the edges. Historians still disagree on how effective straw bedding is in protecting health. Some people consider it a savior, reducing the number of pneumonia cases by isolating soldiers from the cold fall. Others, however, believe that pest infestations may prevent more diseases than bedding. Between warmth and hygiene, between one enemy and another, it is an uncomfortable balance. Your senses are full of contradictions. A faint straw beneath your body is warm. The cold air is clumped to your skin. Invisible fleas are scratching your wrist. Every time the cards are shuffled, a low creaking sound is produced. A strange and soothing sound, as if the mattress itself were sighing along with your fatigue. Nearby, one of your comrades minus arms is muttering to himself in his sleep, moving heavily. His own strong mattress rustles, like a field in the wind. Another person sneezed, cursed and then turned over. The room was filled with the chorus of human survival, snoring, dragging feet, coughing. Despite the harsh environment, every soldier tried his best to rest his body. There is also a strange kind of psychological comfort. That is, there is something lower than you, no matter how humble it is. Sleeping on a bare stone feels very embarrassing and makes people think you are of low status. On the other hand, a straw bed gives people the illusion of a bed, an illusion of preserving humanity. In a world where honor and morale are as important as swords and knives, even such an illusion can keep soldiers sane. Poseidon dug deeper, ignoring the itchy straw that pierced through the fabric. Tomorrow when you stand up, you'll be sore all over and there will be dry grass stuck to your clothes. But tonight that's enough. You are lifted to a place far enough from that frozen stone to make your dreams possible. So you let yourself drift with the wind, hypnotized by the rustling of the straw, the smell of the soil and sheep, and a faint hope that this bag of hay could pull you back from the cold hand of death. The rustling of the wheat stalks gradually faded into the deeper night. But in your tray, you are not alone. It's not true. You could feel that all around were bodies, wrapped in wool, cloaks and rags, huddled together like salted fish in a bucket. At first, I felt very embarrassed. The squeezing of another man's elbow, the occasional movement, bumped into your ribs. But soon you realized that this was no accident. This is the strategy, sharing body temperature. This is not glamorous, but it's very effective. You slowly approached the man beside you, but he didn't back down. He is as desperate as you. Together, you form an awkward barrier to prevent the cold human warmth from seeping out and blending until it almost feels like a fire without a flame. One soldier after another joined in, then another, until the room became a knot of tangled limbs and uneven breathing. The air was filled with the smell of sweat and wool. But you didn't complain. Tonight, survival trumps dignity. This is a mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, soldiers often slept collectively, not only for space, but also for warmth. The role of the garrison troops indicates that there are few private designs in the military camp. Instead, they are open rooms with trays placed side by side. The principle is very simple. More corpses gathering in one place means less heat loss. Chroniclers describe that during the winter campaign, soldiers huddled together like a brood of cubs. This is not acting on impulse. Before they had this word, this was science. When you consider the closeness of these ties, you will find a strange gossip. Some sources mention that the soldiers deliberately rotated their sleeping places so that no one would be exposed to the whirlwind every night. Others told some jokes about the warmth of marrying a roommate minus black humor, but it was humor in any case. You smiled and said, black humor warms both the body and the soul. Historians are still debating whether this gathering was a common practice or was exaggerated by later romantic stories about brotherhood. Is it necessity for every fortress, or merely a poetic embellishment? Evidence shows that it is true. Although it may not be as noble as depicted in the legends, you can imagine that in the stench of an unwashed corpse and the itching of pests, this posture is not out of loyalty but pure despair. Your senses will remind you of the warmth on your shoulders, the foul smell from a person who hasn't taken a bath for weeks, the deep voice of someone gritting their teeth in an uneasy dream. You frown your nose and then relax, because otherwise it will be even worse. Stench is better than frostbite. When you were lying among your comrades, you noticed something else. Contact between people will calm you down. The cold isolation makes you feel insignificant in the face of the vast rocks and winter. But here, you are bound. Breathe together and rise and fall with the rhythm of the team. Your breasts expand in sync with those of strangers, and they suddenly feel like family. The boundary between you two blurs in the darkness. You wonder if this is the way social animals endure warmth, not only physically, but also psychologically. The night went on, though the trickling through the crack of the door was still wriggling, though the stones were still absorbing the warmth. You found yourself dozing off. You hear faint whispers. Some people are praying in low voices while others are joking about lice marching in formation. Laughter gently rippled and was soon swallowed up by snoring. In fact, no one can spend the winter alone in a castle. The stone is to roughen the wind is too cruel. You need hierarchy. You need straw. But most importantly, you need each other. So you were even more deeply entangled in the physical world, breathing with people you hardly knew, believing that you could stay together until dawn. The body pressing on you is moving. Gradually, this group of people start to relax themselves. The men stretched their stiff limbs, scratched the itchy areas and complained about the endless cold. You also stood up, dragging your cloak over your shoulders. Your bones ached from being wrapped in sweat and straw all night. But when you open the door, a new feeling greets you minus warmth, faint and flickering, wafting from the fireplace in the hall downstairs. You dragged your feet down the stairs. Your boots echoed and the lights grew brighter and brighter. When you walk into the hall, the scene before your eyes is almost unimaginable. A large stone fireplace was wide open. Its blackened mouth swallowed the wood in one gulp, and the fire inside shot out sparks and crackled, as if mocking the winter outside. The soldiers gathered around the brazier. The legs of the iron pot were filled with charcoal, and they stretched out their hands, hunched over like a person praying on an altar. You float towards one yourself, allowing the heat waves to lick your fingers, feeling as if life has been away for too long and then surges back into your body. And mainstream fact about castles. In the central halls of many castles, there are large fireplaces, which are not only used for cooking but also for heating the garrison rooms. However, heating the castles is always a failed battle. A spacious area, high ceilings and drafty stone walls swallowed up the warmth. A fire can relieve local pressure, but just a few steps away, the cold will surround you again like a predator. To solve this problem, portable brazing becomes indispensable. People drag them from one room to another, filling them with charcoal, or wood embers to create wall islands in the cold ocean. You squatted beside a fire basin, stretched out your hands. With the blood returned to your fingers, you almost cried. A smell of smoke swirled into your nostrils, mingled with the scents of iron and sweat. Your eyes hurt, but you don't care. You drew closer and closer, until your cheeks turned red. The contrast between the numb toes and the burning face makes you feel strangely dizzy. Here is a strange gossip. At night, soldiers would sometimes stuff the heated stones or bricks from the stoves into their beds. These stones, wrapped in cloth, are like primitive thermos flasks and can emit heat for several hours. This was a smart hacker until someone inevitably misjudged the packaging and woke up to find the smoking straw. A story of the mattress catching fire unexpectedly has been passed down like a cautionary tale, told with a cold laugh. Even if I freeze to death, quipped an old captain, it's still better than being roasted like a goose in my own bed. Historians remain puzzled as to how effective castle fireplaces were in providing eating for a few privileged classes. Is the auditorium really a public haven? Or was it that most of the heat was absorbed by the lords and officials, while the common people were shivering in their rooms? Some people believe that the scale of medieval halls made it almost impossible to heat them up, no matter how big the fire was. Others counter that in times of crisis, especially during the siege, Lords might order a continuous replenishment of fuel to maintain morale. But the evidence is contradictory, allowing us to only see half of the picture. Warmth is both a necessity and a luxury. Depending on one's status and environment, the warmth given varies. You sat on the cold bench by the stove, hunched over, listening to the crackling sounds. Around you, people whisper softly, their voices softening from liberation. A soldier stretched his boots towards the flames. The damp leather dried up and steam rose faintly. Another person poked the fire with a stick, making it higher, and then giggled foolishly as if he had tamed a wild beast. There is a sense of friendship here, fragile yet genuine, forged in the shared warmth. This sensory contrast is almost intoxicating. The fire is roaring, your face is filled with warmth, but your back remains cold. The stone wall behind you presses the cold air into your spine. It's as if it exists simultaneously in two seasons. Summer is in front of you, and winter is behind you. Your skin aches, and you don't know if it's sweating or shivering. You look up at the corridor upstairs, where there are more abundant rooms hidden. The lord's room was smaller, more enclosed and easier to heat up. Tapestries hung on the wall, blocking the airflow, while the brazier and furnace often the sting of the night. You felt a pang of jealousy. Grades have their privileges, but you also know that the soldiers here, shoulder to shoulder, hold the braziers and build up their own resilience. Perhaps God feels warm tonight, but when the firewood was running out, could he withstand the harsh siege? When the flame turns to ashes, will he know how to endure it? The hall was filled with the smell of smoke, and your cape wouldn't disperse either. You coughed and smiled gently, realizing that smoking also has its comfort. It reminds you that the flame is real, alive and burning enough to prevent death. It still has the smell of cooking. Above the embers hung a pot with thin soup bubbling, indicating that there would be steam inside later tonight. You licked your chapped lips in anticipation. Your thoughts drift to the unstable fuel itself. The strength of the firewood pile determines the intensity of the fire. In winter, trees are harder to cut down and carriages harder to tow. You can imagine that the storerooms in the castle were shrinking day by day, and the wood was neatly piled up in the sheds. People were counting the logs as if they were treasures. Some records show that during the siege, despair forced the defenders to burn furniture, carriages, and even the wooden fences that had once been used to protect the city walls. This idea is even more chilling than a draft. What would happen if even the fireplace turned black? But you are hot tonight. You are now sitting undozing off, and the warmth makes your eyelids heavy. The flames hummed a lullaby of crackling and crackling, and you thought of the strange relationship between humans and flames. Without it, you would be helpless, just like a frozen animal. With it, you will feel almost invincible, as if nothing can break the circle of light and warmth around you. However, it is fragile, always in need of feeding, and always at risk of collapse. You lean forward and stretch out your hands again, amazed at how quickly the heat dissipates. It's only a few minutes away from the brazier, but your fingers have already started to harden. The blood retreated as if it knew that this battle was impossible to win. But when you come back, the cycle will continue. The dance of warmth, and coldness is as ancient as that of human beings. The hall fell silent. The men returned to their beds one after another, warm enough to risk falling asleep. You lingered longer and longer, unwilling to give up the comfort of fire. You watched the wood collapse inward, emitting a red glow, just like a miniature fortress surrounded by flames. You chuckled to yourself at this irony, and then finally detached yourself. Your cloak now smells of smoke, and this smell will last for several days, that you don't mind. This is the perfume of survival. You crawled back to your room, your cheeks flushed and your heart more at ease. The cold is hitting you again, but this time it doesn't feel so cruel. Dulled by the recollection of the embrace by the fireplace, you curled up on the straw, covered your head with the cloak and told yourself that you could hold on for another night. After all, the fire below is still burning, and you will come back tomorrow. The next night was like a thickened, merciless blanket, covered with frost. That feeling that seeps into the marrow and mocks every layer of wool. You're back on duty at the city wall again. The wind was biting your face fiercely, and you didn't know if your nose would still hurt. The brazier you left in the hall now feels like a distant memory, faded and almost like a dream. Here, there are only stones beneath your feet and the sky above your head. You can only survive by relying on even smaller means. You turned your gaze to the flickering candle tips in the candlestick by the wall. Its light was faint, a trembling halo that could barely push away the shadows. But as you slowly approach it and surround it with your hands to block the wind, you realize that the flame in it's not only light but also warmth. Small, fragile, but an undeniable existence. You lean towards it, your cheek stinging, your palm reaching out for the faint light, and were surprised to find that a ball of butter could make the night a little less unbearable. A mainstream fact is that, in the Middle Ages, candles and wick lamps were not merely lighting tools. They are the guardians against despair and unease. In the castle, torches illuminated the hall, but private spaces, guard rooms, private rooms, and even outposts all rely heavily on these small lights. It is made from animal fat. If you are rich, you can also make it from beeswax. The candle burned steadily, giving off a soft warmth, and the soldiers soon began to appreciate this warmth. No, candles can't heat a room. When your face is stiff from the cold and your breath freezes, its radiance makes you feel human again. You licked your dry lips, glanced down at the cigarette butt, and recalled the greasy smell of butter. It adheres to the air, with the smell of earth and a faint stench, reminding people that candles were produced by animals that were slaughtered a long time ago. This is not pleasant, but it can help you stand firm because even putrid fat can bring life when it burns at night. The flames danced, teasing your eyes with their rhythm. You found yourself captivated, as if they were whispering a promise. I will stay with you until dawn. It was a strange gossip. Some soldiers believe that sitting near a bundle of candles can keep them warm, just like a miniature fireplace. A bundle of 10 or more marijuana can indeed raise the temperature of a closed small room to an astonishing level. In fact, a recorded trick is to place a candle under an upside-down earthenware pot. The heat of the flame will accumulate under the pot and radiate outward like a primitive space heater. You can't help but grin. What do you think that people in the Middle Ages invented DIY survival skills long before YouTube tutorials came along? Of course, danger has always existed. The fire also began in this way, sometimes swallowing up the entire barracks. Historians remain puzzled by the symbolic role of these flames. Were they purely practical, or have men endowed them with deeper meanings? Some people believe that in the painful isolation of the garrison, a candle is not merely light, it is a companion, and even a spiritual ally. Others were not convinced, saying that the soldiers were too pragmatic and would not project their emotions onto tallow and wake. And you, standing in the cold, know which side feels right. When the darkness no longer approaches you, you hold on to any embers tightly, no matter how small they are, and convince yourself that they matter. You drew closer. Your breathing was in danger of extinguishing the flame. You quickly withdrew, your heart pounding. The thought of losing this small source of comfort scares you more than you admit. You know how fragile it is. The gust of wind and an advertible elbow, or even your own exhalation, could send you back into temple darkness. It's not glorious to survive here. It is unstable and dependent on such tiny things. If you don't tremble, you might laugh. When you draw your own attention, the soundscape will change. The candle made a faint humming sound, and the wax drops on the stone made a gentle dripping sound. The wind howled on the battlements, and the shutters below rustled, but your ears were firmly listening to the faint hum of the flames. Contrast is comforting. Outside is a wild world, but here there is a refuge between hands. You think of moths drawn into the sunlight, and this time you fully understand them. A comrade came over, stomping his boots to stir up the blood circulation. When he saw you bending over on the cigarette butt, he giggled. Marriott. Really? He joked, but his voice was covered by the scarf tightly wrapped around his chin. You shrugged your shoulders, smiled slightly, and said nothing. Because in fact, yes, you married it and were bound together by gratitude. He took out another candle from a pocket, lit the first one and placed it beside your candle. Now there are two flames, with double the radiance and double the comfort. The air around them felt a little warmer, and you leaned closer to him, your shoulders almost touching each other. You watched the flames sway together, their tiny bodies braving the fierce wind. It feels like victory, no matter how insignificant. Do you still remember the whispers in the military camp, where people told stories of candles burning brighter when danger approached and flames refusing to go out when death lingered? Superstition or truth, you can't help but wonder. Every flash is like a message. Each crackling sound is like a warning. Perhaps this is nonsense. Perhaps not. You only know that it will take up your time, and occupation itself is a way of survival. Your senses remain on the texture. The smooth dripping wax is like frozen ears. The occasional hissing sound when it lands on a cold stone. When you get too close, I gently kiss your face. You are astonished that such a small and easily overlooked thing has now become your only ally in the void. Then came the vulnerable moment. A sudden gust of wind crashed against the wall, causing your hood to creak and a burst of flames to shoot out. You and your companions instinctively protected the survivor, surrounding him with your hands and protecting him, as if he were a child. You succeeded. The flame stabilized, quivering, but you were still alive. The sense of relief you feel is so intense that it's unbelievable. You smiled nervously, realizing that your sanity throughout the night had relied on the small stretch of burning fat. Historians may endlessly debate the uses of candles, but no debate can grasp the emotional pillar that candles provide. The fireplace roared, the brazier was smoking, but the candles were whispering. They remind you that warmth can be humble and light can exist in the tiniest container. The shift change was over it. Unwillingly, you snuffed out the cigarette, but unpinched the wick with your calloused fingers. The smoke rose gently, carrying the last hint of butter. You took a deep breath, made a funny face, but felt strangely comforted. Another cigarette but will be lit tomorrow night. Another small flame will keep the darkness out of the bay. You walked down the stairs with heavy steps, your eyes still glistening. You realize that in a cold stone castle, even the faintest flame would seem like a miracle. The yard rotation is over and you enter the fortress again. Your body aches from the cold, but as you walk through the yard, you notice something strange, the obvious difference between the two buildings standing side by side. One is a magnificent stone pagoda, and the castle itself is like a frozen monument. Another one is smaller and more rudimentary, a wooden structure, a granary or a wooden watchtower, with its walls lined with planks instead of cut wooden blocks. You instinctively lean towards the wood. Do you know why? It feels warm. This is a paradox, isn't it? You might think that grand stone walls offer more protection, but at night, they are cruel. After sunset, the stone still exudes coldness and absorbs any residual heat. In contrast, wood remains warm like a miser holding a coin. You sneak into the wooden tower and immediately notice the difference. The air is not muggy, but it's not so bone-minus chilling either. The wood flows and bends, giving the impression of a living structure, one that moves and breathes, rather than suffocates. This is a mainstream fact. In early medieval Europe, before the emergence of huge stone castles, many lords still relied on wooden castles. Archaeologists have discovered the Motte Bailey fortifications. These simple wooden towers are located on mounds and were used both for defense and for home purposes. They not only have a lower cost but also a faster construction speed. They are more bearable in winter. For durability and defense, stone castles eventually replaced them, but many chroniclers point out that wooden castles are milder to the human body. Some people even say that those stationed on wooden towers sleep better than those living in grand stone halls. Move your hand along the wooden board and feel the texture beneath your fingertips. Compared with the damp mineral scent of limestone, there is a faint rained ear smell, perhaps the scent of pine trees, attached to the building, soothing. Take a deep breath and for a brief moment, imagine yourself in a small wooden house instead of a fortress. Comfortable and simple. Here's a strange gossip. Soldiers sometimes stuff moss or clay into the gaps between the woods as insulation materials. This primitive cork stopper method can prevent air from entering. It is a technique borrowed from a farmer's hut. In some areas, they even mix animal manure with straw, which is a dirty but effective fillant. Now you can imagine a team of soldiers smearing mud into the cracks in the wall and coldly joking that nothing can keep the devil out like a wall of shit. Perhaps on a cold night, they were right. Historians are still debating whether the preference for stands was purely for military purposes or if the Lord truly believed that they could improve living conditions. After all, stone looks impressive, exuding authority and eternity, while wood appears humble, even temporary. Some scholars believe that the Lord sacrificed their comfort for the sake of prestige. Even if their soldiers suffered in the cold military camps, they would still choose the castles that displayed their power. Others, however, believe that if designed properly, such as with tapestries, fireplaces and smart vents, stones can indeed be warmer. The facts may vary from fortress to fortress, and most ordinary soldiers have never tasted such luxurious benefits. When you sit on the bench inside the wooden tower, your senses become sharp. The wooden wall moaned gently in the wind, like an old man sighing. Strangely enough, the sound was comforting, and not as shrill as the silence reverberating in the stone corridor. You can hear the faint crackling sound of the resin in the wood, as it adapts to the cold. They small reminder materials themselves are alive and dynamic. Compared with the stone minus built-in chamber, this wooden chamber is not only warmer in temperature, but also more comforting in spirit. If you lean against the wall, the difference will be quite obvious. The wood does not have the bone minus chilling coldness of granite. Instead, it gently and almost neutrally squeezes backward. Close your eyes and imagine yourself back in your childhood, leaning against the wall of a barn or cottage, away from the wind and rain. It's strange how memory itself is isolated from you. How can a sensory detail bring about a sense of comfort far beyond its physical reality? Around you, some comrades minus arms are complaining about all this unfairness. The adults slept in private rooms hung with tapestries, while they crowded into cold stone barracks. A person complained that he would rather trade his sword for a wooden house in the village, at least until spring. Others laughed, not because it was absurd, but because they were thinking the same thing. You imagine the small houses in the village, with their low roofs, walls and doorways all smeared with mud. Compared with castles, they are nothing at all. However, farmers there survive the winter by the fire in the fireplace. When your family gets together, you can now also feel the same warmth of wood. Perhaps the castle is safer and less likely to be hit by arrows. But in cold weather, farmers have the upper hand. Your mind wanders into a darker picture, a siege. Imagine being trapped in a stone fortress for several months. Fuel consumption decreases. The stone wall absorbed every bit of warmth. The men crowded in the corner, their beards covered with frost. The air was so cold that the ink in the will had frozen and the wine had turned into mud. Would the defensive effect of a wooden pagoda be worse? Sure, but for those inside, at least their nights might be more benevolent. Your hand ran along the wood again, leaving a faint warmth in your palm. This feeling is like touching the flanks of an animal, a connection with organic things. Stone is as cold as death, an eternal monument. Wood is impermanent, fragile, but tolerant. You wonder if the soldiers also have the same contradiction, that it is easier to survive in places that the lords consider temporary. The wind rustled the blinds, but the through wind that came in was weaker than that in the stone hall. Indeed, someone filled the crevices with moss, and you silently thanked him. You breathe in the smell of the earth, a mixture of sap, moisture and human labor. You'll be grateful for every little effort people make to make the night gentle. A comrade sat beside you, pulling his cloak tighter. "This place doesn't feel like a tomb anymore, does it?" he said with a tired smile. You nod because it has. In a world where every bit of comfort counts, even a humble choice between wood and stone can mean the difference between pain and bearable sleep. You sink deeper, close your eyes, and let the wooden tower surround you like a lullaby. The stone castle outside is faintly visible, cold and grand, but tonight you prefer the understated wooden company. It is not so grand, nor so eternal, but it is more kind to the body and bones. The next day, the warmth of the wooden tower lingered in your mind, but by nightfall, you found yourself back in the well-ventilated hall. The fire was low, the shadows were long, and each cloak gave off the smell of forest smoke. Your stomach is roaring, for the warmth tonight comes not only from the brazier and the blanket, but also from what you swallow. You dragged your feet towards the shelf table, where there was a pot of soup steaming slightly, served in a rough wooden bowl, for your turn to eat. The first bite is almost sacred. Heat passes through your tongue, through your throat, and into your chest, just like embers hidden beneath your ribs. It doesn't have much barley, some root vegetables, or perhaps a piece of salted meat floating like a treasure, but it changes your feeling. The cold outside still presses against the walls, but you have a small fireplace inside. This is a mainstream fact. The garrisons in the Middle Ages relied heavily on hot liquids to keep warm. Water, beer and light wine are staple foods because water is often unsafe. In winter, people would drink these beverages as hot as possible, gently heating them over coal, seasoning them with herbs, or in wealthy families, with cinnamon and cloves from the east. Soups and broths, thick stewed peas, beans, and any meat scraps that can be saved are not luxuries. They are the lifeline. Warm food is not nearly nourishing. It helps the body resist frost. The Chronicle mentions that the commander ordered extra hot broth during the long winter duty, admitting that morale itself can be scooped into a bowl. You poured the pot back again, and steam enveloped your cheeks. Its taste is earthy, simple, salty enough to sting chapped lips. But you won't complain. Around you, people are greedily sucking. Some are blowing air into their bowls, and some are drinking to fast, their tongues burning hot and hissing. The hall was filled with the music of hunger. The wooden spoon jingled, and I drank in big gulps, feeling full. Here is a strange gossip. In some Garonnes, soldiers vowed to treat winter depression with hot beer. When mixed with a little butter or egg yolk, it turns into something called posset, which is both a drink and a food. Its mixture is believed to strengthen the body, prevent colds and even help with sleep. Imagine a room full of burly soldiers sipping eggnog equivalent to that of the Middle Ages, grinning in the foam and scratching their beards. It's not entirely the image of a brave warrior. However, in the coldest months, posset might have saved more lives than swords. Historians are still debating whether these warm rations were always provided to ordinary soldiers, or mainly to those with higher military ranks. Some records suggest abundance. The kitchen in the castle produced gallons of broth and barrels of malt liquor. Others have painted a more grim picture when supply is reduced. People are forced to gnaw on frozen bread crusts and drink melted snow. The truth may fluctuate with one's fortune. Some winters are generous, while others are harsh. It is certain that from the last century to the next century, the longing for warmth in the stomach has been widespread. Your senses are intoxicated by this moment. Steam rises into your nose. The saltness covers your tongue. Heat slowly enters your stomach. The broth is full of vitality within you, flowing outward to your fingertips and relaxing your stiff joints. For the first time in a few days, your shoulders have loosened. Your chin is relaxed. You don't realize how tightly you hold yourself until warmth reminds you of the feeling of ease. A soldier beside you is holding a bowl and smiling. He said, "It's even better than a leather jacket." The others all nodded in agreement. They knew he wasn't exaggerating. Such a meal can bring several hours of comfort, and perhaps even a peaceful sleep. Just think how fragile that kind of comfort is. The pot will soon be empty. The bowl will soon be licked clean. And at dawn, hunger will return. But now you allow yourself to fully enjoy the illusion of abundance. You watched the murky soup in the bowl and the scattered barley grains mixed together, and saw something almost sacred. This is not just food. This is survival. Your thoughts drift to the farmers outside the wall. In their small house, they look after the big pot and feed the family with a thin layer of cabbage soup. There is a kinship here. Different lives, the same instinct. The stomach is filled with warmth, luring the body to endure. You wonder if they also sit around the stove in the evening, holding bowls in their hands and taking a sigh of relief with each bite. Perhaps coldness is democratic. It makes everyone humble. The hall was getting quieter and quieter. After finishing their meals, people leaned against the wall, and some were absent-mindedly licking their spoons. You licked your own, tasted the saltness of the utensils, and then scraped off the last trace in the bowl. How pitiful, really. There is so little food, but so much demand. The warmth will last, and that is what matters most. There is a superstition in the army that people who eat hot broth at midnight will not die of frost in the morning. Do you believe it, perhaps? Or perhaps you just want to do so. Sometimes belief is easier than reason. The steam in your bowl has faded, but the memory remains. You exhale slowly, the mist and smoke mix, allowing yourself a half-minus smile. Historians may debate the accuracy of the garrison records, but they cannot debate the power of this feeling, this quiet, private victory of warmth, spreading from the stomach to the skin. This is a small bite, a bowl of victory, a night after night of victory in countless castles. You pushed the bowl away, pulled the cloak tight and lay on the straw. The cold will come again, merciless and merciless. But now there is a secret weapon within you, broth malt liquor, and the fleeting embers make you believe that you can get through the night. Your stomach still remembers the broth from the previous night, but in the garrison of the castle, hunger will never be satisfied. When night falls again, your thoughts are no longer about fire or straw, but about food minus that thick, long minus lasting food. I had salted meat tonight. It was hard and salty, but surprisingly comfortable. Is it on a tray, holding a knife in your hand, and cut thin strips from a large piece of beef that is as salty as a stone. The surface is glittering with sharp crystals, enough to sting your fingertips. You can't even bite. Your chin hurts terribly, but when you chew, the salt melts and the meat becomes soft, slowly releasing heat in your stomach. It's neither tender nor fresh, but it's fueled. You welcome it as you would an ugly old friend. This is a mainstream fact. Cured meat was the staple food for soldiers in the Middle Ages, especially in winter. Sun minus drying, smoking and drying enable beef, pork and fish to be preserved for months without spoiling. In the storeroom of the castle, buckets of salted meat were stored, preparing for the off-minus season and the siege. The role of the garrison Rupsand, the records of the 100 Years' War showing that soldiers were provided with salted rations every day, usually bread and malt liquor. Only rare fresh game or vegetables could break this monosaltness. Salt itself is very precious and is a commodity controlled and taxed by the Lord. However, its dual function as a preservative makes survival possible. You took another bite, and your tongue was scalded hot by the salt water. The taste is too strong, for you know these salts are more than just seasonings. It keeps diseases away. In an era when diseases caused by food worm were likely to be fatal than traumas caused by war, salt meant safety. Despite this, you still chuckled softly, because the meat was so dry that it felt like chewing on a belt. Imagine soldiers grinding their teeth on it, or comparing large stones with shoe soles. Here is a strange gossip. Many soldiers soaked salted meat in beer or broth overnight to soften it, turning it into something chewable before dawn. In fact, some people joke that malt liquor is not just for drinking, it is a cooking tool. There is even a saying that someone wrapped salted beef in a damp cloth and placed it near a brazier to let it steam until it loosened. That smell must be very pungent, half salty and half pungent. But in the cold darkness, it might look like a feast. Historians remain divided on whether salted meat can truly raise body temperature or merely provide an illusion of strength. Some nutritionists believe that it provides soldiers with the key proteins and calories needed for winter endurance. Others believe that a high salt content can cause men to dehydrate, forcing them to drink more malt liquor and thus stumble through the night in a half-minus drunk state. Is salted meat food or intentional destruction? These records leave a great deal of room for debate. However, your senses know the truth of the present moment. The saltness scorches your chapped lips and pricks your tongue, but once swallowed, it gives off a sense of satisfaction. You chew methodically, with the crunching of salt echoing in your ears. The fibrous meat resists until it finally gives in. The aftertaste is long-minus lasting, with the flavors of metal and earth, evoking the animal from which it came and the wooden barrel in which it was buried for several months. Around you, other soldiers are chewing in silence. The hall was not filled with conversations, but with rhythmic chewing sounds. Occasionally, someone would spit out overly salty fragments, then frown, shrug their shoulders and take another bite. This is not happiness, but it is a kind of ritual, and the ritual itself can bring comfort to people. You notice a man carefully cutting his share into small strips, almost devoutly. He tucked some into the bag to keep for later consumption. Another person immediately stuffed his food into his mouth, as if hoping to finish it as soon as possible before he realized how unappetizing it was. You smiled because everyone has their own way of dealing with monotony. The room was filled with a strong smell of salt, smoke and the stench of decay that the wine barrel couldn't hide. You wrinkled your nose but still kept chewing. Hunger teaches tolerance. When you are eating, your thoughts drift outside the castle. You can imagine farmers eating a hodgepodge of cabbage and onions in their huts. Although it's quite ordinary, it might be even more delicious than your salt plate. You have no idea whether they envy you, a soldier with rations, or sympathize with you, looking down upon the cured meat like a dog. This thought makes you laugh because in winter, jealousy and pity become the same thing. Everyone just wants to get through tonight. A soldier broke the silence with superstition. He swore that eating meat before going to bed could prevent nightmares and that protein could fix the soul in the body. Others mock, but if you stop and think about it, perhaps it's nonsense. Perhaps the salt itself played a role, not only preserving the meat, but also keeping your spirit until dawn. In this world, who can say? Historians often overlook the small comfort that salted meat offers because they focus on its scarcity, monotony and danger. But here, under the flickering of the torch, you will have a different feeling. This is a ritual of patience. Cut, chew, swallow, endure. Night after night, the incantation was repeated until spring returned. When your rations are all gone, you lick the salt on your fingers and taste the sting on your cracked skin. You lean back against the straw. The taste is still on your tongue, and you feel a moderate force seeping into your muscles. Tomorrow you will curse monotony again, but tonight you will be grateful. The cold outside still lingers, but there is something solid, heavy and unbreakable in your heart, just like the walls of a castle. It's not delicious. It's not soft, but neither are you. The salted meat lies heavily in your stomach, just like a stone wrapped in salt water. But the night shows no mercy. When the last torch crackled, the duty captain shook your shoulder. It's your turn again. You groaned in a low voice, half cursing. But an order is an order. The castle can sleep, but it cannot be blind in the darkness. You put on the stiff cape from the cold yesterday and staggered along the path by the wall. The wind blows on you first. The unfiltered wind directly passes through the seams of the fabric, as if mocking every layer of clothing you are wearing. You clenched your spear tightly, put on your boots, and embarked on the long march of the century, pacing back and forth, step by step, as if walking could make your blood flow faster. A mainstream fact is that the vigil in the Middle Ages was cruel. The soldiers were divided into shifts, usually lasting for several hours, and there was no guarantee of warmth or comfort. The winter guard mission is regarded as necessary and torturous. This is necessary because castles are always vulnerable to sudden attacks, which is painful as it means being exposed to the harshest times, and the body needs rest the most. Chronicles record that people fell down due to exhaustion or cold, and their only crime was an unfortunate mission. Some commanders often take turns on duty to save soldiers time. Others, however, don't care and let fatigue torment them. You tightened your hood, and the breath you exhaled was like a pale cloud. The sound landscape is the creaking of solitary boots stepping on stones, the occasional gurgling of wood, and the barking of dogs from the distant village. Your ears will tense up and you will hear even more sinister sounds. Footsteps on the suspension bridge, the click of the ladder, the roar of arrows in the darkness. But in most cases, you hear nothing and nothing becomes an enemy, silently looking at you. Every moment stretches like a toffee, until you doubt whether dawn will come. This bizarre gossip comes from the strange way men confront this silence. Some people sang lullabies in a low voice to keep themselves awake. Some people ignore hard bread and even suck on stones, chewing the act of chewing, preventing sleep. Several desperate people stabbed their thighs with daggers. A tiny wound can alert the body. You gave a wry smile, for the rhythm was already enough to punish you. However, you still understand. When the air itself is against you, the line between drowsiness and death becomes very thin. Historians are still debating whether punishment has always been as severe as the chronicles claim during a slumbering century. Some people say that sleeping at work will lead to death, while others say it's just flogging or a fine. This might depend on the lord, on the intensity of the war, or perhaps on the captain's mood. It is certain that fear itself is a kind of motivation. No one wanted to be found dozing off. So they walked, muttered, paced and prayed hour after hour, with their fingers and toes gnawed by the frost. You are now pacing back and forth. With each turn, the spear gently taps against the chest wall. Cold stones pass through your boots, numbing your toes until you no longer feel them. You bend your hand, put your almond blow into your palm, but the relaxation is brief. Every time you inhale cold air, you will have a runny nose, tears and an itchy throat, but you can still walk. The sensory details become sharp because nothing else takes up your time. With every gust of wind, the flames of the torch crackled and hissed angrily. The shadow seemed to be moving, stretching out in the yard like a ghost. You smelled the damp stone odor, the faint smoke rising from the hole downstairs, and your own sweat freezing into your cloak. The saltness of the meat still lingers on your tongue, which reminds you of dinner and makes you feel as if you have lived a different life. You have spent another century at the corner tower. He nodded, his eyes vacant and his lips bluish. Neither of you spoke. Words seemed superfluous and are wasted in the wind. On the contrary, you shared a brief moment of unity. Two frozen souls were tied to the same duty. He turned around and returned to his post. You returned to your side and fell silent again. Somewhere deep in your mind, you heard the captain's voice from before. Keep moving forward. A person who remains still is a dead person. You want to know if he knows the literal meaning of these words. Even a 1-minute pause can cause sleep, and sleep will lead to death. So you march. Your thoughts wander, for what else can you do? You imagine the warmth of a country fireplace, a wife's embrace, and the laughter of children wrapped in blankets. Fantasy. Yes, but necessary fantasy. Without them your spirit would be crushed by the clock, just as the cold would crush your body. You hold your spear tightly, pretending it to be a cane guiding you through the darkness. Time passed slowly and seemed very long. The moon stubbornly hung on the mountain, as if mocking your pain. You start to wonder if dawn is a myth and if the world is just an endless night. Then a voice broke the monotony. It was the low cry of an owl. You froze, your heart beating fast, and your ears desperately trying to hear more. There was nothing behind, only a bird. You let out a trembling sigh of relief, gave a gentle smile to your tense nerves, and then continued pacing. Men have a superstition that the owl's call during night duty is good luck and a sign that the gods are protecting you. For you believe it, perhaps. Now, you can accept anything. Historians may debate the cruelty of the watch-keeping duties in the Middle Ages, but standing here, you know that it was not cruelty that defined it. This is endurance. When everything in your heart is begging for rest, you can still keep moving, keep breathing and keep your eyes open. You're not a hero tonight. You are merely a body that refuses to fall. Finally, a faint light quietly crossed the horizon. Dawn dyed the snowfield a light blue, and the sky changed from black to grey. You breathed a sigh of relief. The shoulders droop. Its transformation has come to an end. You are alive. Your feet might go numb. Your fingers are roaring, but the castle still stands firm. So are you. You hand the spear to the next person, stumble down the stairs and fall onto your straw mat. Sleep will soon take you away, and the cold is still grasping your skin. But for now, the task has been accomplished. You stayed up all night on duty again. Another battle against the merciless cold. When you wake up, your stiff hands are the first reminder of the night. Your fingers curled up unwillingly, swollen and painful, and the memory of the spear hilt was still imprinted on your palm. You moaned and slowly bent them, as if coaxing life back to the frozen forest. Then you suddenly thought, what about the weapon itself? Steel is very dangerous in winter. On a night like yesterday, leaving your sword, spearhead or helmet exposed feels just like touching ice directly from a river. You will recall the burning sensation of frost on exposed skin, because frostbite doesn't care whether it comes from a stone, the wind, or a tool used to sustain your life. This is a mainstream fact. In the Middle Ages, soldiers had to constantly maintain their weapons, not only for combat readiness but also for survival in harsh weather conditions. Swords and armors will freeze very hard, and metals will contract and become brittle in extremely cold conditions. The chains of men may get stuck, the helmets may break, and the spear shafts may crack due to moisture, freezing, and expansion. The chronicles mention that the garrison troops not only had to fight against the enemy, but also contend with rust, frost and hostility of the environment. To maintain the functionality of their weapons, soldiers polish them with oil or fat, wipe them with cloth, and place them as close to heat sources as possible. If your hand is stuck to the hilt of a sword, just as your tongue is stuck to frozen iron, then a sword is of no use. You looked at the other side of the room. Several people were already busied. They crowded around the stove, wiping their equipment with rags and butter. The air was filled with greasy, spicy and animal-like odors. You join them, draw your scabbard, and the metal loses its luster in the dim light. Your hand withdraws as soon as it touches. Steel is more easily bitten by cold than stone. Bizarre gossip has come to light. Some soldiers hid smaller weapons under their cloaks, or even under their bedding to keep warm. The dagger was pressed against the ribs, the axe was placed on the thigh, and the sword was carefully put under the blanket. This is not merely to guard against sudden attacks. This way, when you hold the handle in the morning, it won't pull off the skin on your fingers. There is even a legend that a desperate man urinated on the hilt of his sword before battle to thaw it for transportation. Perhaps it may not be decent, but needs will never care about dignity. Historians are still debating whether this kind of improvisation is a common practice or a colorful exaggeration. Some sources emphasize the discipline of the knight, with polished armor shining even in the seasons, while others highlight the reality of rusty men and frosty weapons. Perhaps it depends on the rank. The rich, with attendants, can appropriately maintain their equipment, while the low-ranking garrisons can only survive by spitting and drags. The evidence is scattered. Let's imagine a cold morning filled with the sound of metal scraping and murmuring curses. You drag the cloth on the blade, your movements rhythmic and almost soothing. The steel flickers slightly, although your breath fobs it up and frost forms on its surface. Just as quickly as you wipe it, you sighed and shook your head. The struggle against cold, dampness and time itself is endless. You rub harder, determined not to let your weapon betray you at the most crucial moment. Your senses become acute. Your nose is filled with the smell of grease, thick and greasy, sticking to your cloak. The texture of the rag rubs against the steel and feels very rough on your fingertips. Each strike made a faint sound, like the whisper of metal waking from its slumber. You gaze at that sword, recalling the era when it seemed invincible, only to find that nature itself could turn it into something useless. One of your comrades beside you raised his helmet with both hands and shrank back at the edge of the test. "It's cold enough to bite off one's ears," he muttered, placing it beside the fire basin. "When warmth touches iron, it makes a faint, hissing sound." You nodded, imagining the pain of your cold helmet pressing against your skull while on duty. Another soldier chuckled to himself and pulled out a dagger from under his coat. "He said that he kept my hand by his side all night and dried it. It almost bit through a rib, but at least it didn't freeze." The others smiled weakly. Humor is thin, but it can keep you human. You will think of the strange paradox of winter weapons. They are symbols of power, but in the wrong circumstances, they can become a burden. A sword can protect you, but only if you can grasp it. Spears can attack enemies, but only if the barrel does not break due to frost. You start to wonder if the real enemies of the castle are fewer sieges and more seasons. Your thoughts drift to the story of the winter campaign. Chroniclers described the knights' stumbles with numb hands before the battle began, and they even threw away their spears. Some people mention that the blade breaks in the cold, as if the iron itself has become fragile due to frost. Are these stories exaggerated or cautionary tales told by exhausted copyists? Or are they unacceptable facts that make it impossible to admit that steel cannot contend with the indifference of nature? Historians are still debating, but standing here, you tend to favor the latter. Time passes slowly. You are sorting out your equipment. Everyone does the same thing, polishing, oiling, muttering to themselves, as if participating in a strange ritual. The fire crackled, smoke rose gently, and shadows danced on the wall. The sound of scraping steel has turned into a hymn, stable and ruthless, reminding you that survival is not only about keeping your body alive, but also about preparing the tools for war. In the end, you put away your sword, satisfied that it wouldn't betray you tonight. Pull your cloak tighter and move towards the brazier. The warmth kisses your face, but your hands still sting, and the cloth and frost are roaring. You slowly bend your fingers, imagining them stiffly grasping the weapons in the future battle, reluctant to let go. Her comrade came over and giggled foolishly. He said, "It's better to lose a finger than the ability to grasp." He made a funny face and knew he was right. In war, dignity is usually negotiable, but when you hold your sword, you can never do so. That night, you lay on the straw, with the sword tightly stuck beside you, not only to protect yourself, but also to keep warm. You silently mock this absurdity, embracing the steel as if it were your beloved. But you know the truth. Survival makes all things share the same bed. When your eyes become heavy, you feel the coldness of the weapon existing on your thighs, and you whisper a thought in the darkness. "Don't leave me. Don't freeze when I need you the most." You woke up stiffly again, although this time your bones no longer hurt from the cold, but from the endless work. The straw is poking your skin. Your cloak smells of smoke. Your sword lies heavily beside you. Another night passed. Another day has passed with stumbles. But the captain called and the routine went on. Today, people gather in the yard not to eat or sharpen their weapons, but to practice. At first glance, this idea seems very absurd. The air was bone-chilling. The fingers stiffened, the muscles sluggish. Who would train in such weather? But when you and your comrades -in-arms stand in a row, holding the practice poles tightly in your hands, you'll understand. This is not merely about discipline. This is for keeping warm. The records of this period are beyond doubt. Even in the coldest winter, commanders often order exercises. Some sources described that the army practiced swordsmanship, spear thrusting or archery on cold mornings, not because an attack was expected, but because the sport itself could keep people alive. A chronicler once told Riley that soldiers marched to drive death out of their bones. This sentence captures the strange duality of winter training. Yes, this is a preparation for war, but it is also an exercise for survival. When you and your companions began to march in formation, your feet tapped the frozen ground. One step, turn around, and take another step. This rhythm sends heat into your body. Every move is a small victory over the frost. Your breath rose through the huge clouds and merged with the people around you until the yard looked like a steaming big pot. An unusual anecdote from a northern garrison tells of soldiers treating training as a dance in the depth of winter. They stamped their feet, clapped and shouted rhythmically, turning the practice into something somewhere between exercise and celebration. Outsiders might think they are crazy, but the result is undeniable. Laughter, sweat and warmth, even when heavy snow piles up at the door. Nevertheless, there are still differences among modern experts. Some people believe that winter exercises are mainly symbolic, aiming to boost morale and remind soldiers to abide by discipline, rather than for keeping warm. Others, however, counter that exercise is crucial for blood circulation, especially for those stationed in desolate and exposed castles. Perhaps both are correct. Standing here, holding a spear in your hand, you will feel that symbolic meaning and practicality are not mutually exclusive. Exercise saves the body. Discipline saves souls. The sensory world of the drill bit unfolds clearly around you. The sound of the wooden strips clashing resounded through the courtyard. The boots thump in unison, reverberating on the stone wall. The smell of sweat rose rapidly. Despite the cold, it was pungent and almost comforting. It reminds you that your body is still alive and still resisting. You are breathing rapidly and your mouth smells of copper. They're colder than the water in the well, makes the lungs burn. The captain roared his orders, his voice rough but steady. Higher, faster. He doesn't just teach technology. He forced your heart to beat, your muscles to burn and your skin to flush. For this moment you hate him, but you know that when night falls and your body is still buzzing from the fatigue of the day, you will thank him. A soldier beside you murmur the joke. But at least if we fall to the ground and die, we will become flexible. Laughter reverberated over the phone, faint but real. Humor, even if vulgar, is another form of warmth. As your training intensifies, you will notice a strange change. The cold still exists, pressing on you, but it is quelled by the flame rising within your heart. Your cloak flutters as it turns. Its Chilean beads of sweat are trickling down your forehead. For the first time in so many days, You feel strong rather than vulnerable. You realize that paradoxical combat practice, which should have exhausted your energy, can actually restore it. Time passes in a hazy motion. The yard was filled with the crackling sounds of wooden poles, the commands of fucking and the rhythmic sounds of boots. When the captain finally shouted end, these people collapsed onto the benches, their cloaks lifted off, and steam rose from them as if they had been baked rather than frozen. You lean back, your chest rising and falling, feeling as if you were human again. Later, when you return to your straw ray, the afterglow still lingers. Your muscles are sore, but they feel very comfortable. You can still feel the warmth in your veins, a tenacious resistance to the cold outside. You realize that tomorrow it will disappear and the night will return. And now you have stolen several hours of comfort from the clutches of winter. So you fall asleep more easily and be grateful for those exercises that initially seemed meaningless but turned out to be quiet redemption. In a castle built for war, sometimes it is not the enemy, but the season itself that is fighting, and the battlefield is your own body. The warmth brought by daytime training vanishes at night, and the cold takes over again. You rubbed your hands together and bent your stiff fingers, only to find angry red patches on your knuckles. When you bend them, they sting. When you press them, they burn, but when you are alone, they feel a strange numbness. You frown because you have already seen what would happen if the cold won this battle. Frostbite. Everyone in the barracks was whispering to each other, half as fear, half as bluffing. Blackened toes, peeling flesh, fingers vanishing one after another until a person could no longer hold the spear and could no longer march in formation. You looked around the room and noticed that others were doing the same thing as you, rubbing their hands, stomping their feet, and blowing air into cup-shaped palms. This is a ritual of jointly fighting against frost. Evidence from medieval chronicles clearly shows that, although not always named this way, soldiers who lined up in harsh weather were often plagued by frostbite. Monks in northern Europe noticed while writing that some people's fingers dropped like the wax on a candle. In military records, there are often descriptions of soldiers who are not suitable for service after the winter campaign. Little is known about the situation, but its symptoms are clear and unmistakable: numbness, discoloration, and loss. Castles may protect people from arrows, but they cannot withstand the severe cold of winter. You watched one of your comrades unwrap a piece of cloth from his foot. His toes were pale, almost grey, and he made a grimace as he rubbed them hard. Another soldier smeared the mixture of goose oil on his hand and rubbed it, as if praying that the oil would prevent the cold chewing from going deeper. Strangely enough, some remedial measures are completely strange. In some areas, soldiers smeared onion juice or vinegar on their limbs, believing that this would keep the meat alive. Others carried amulets, small relics or blessed coins, wrapped and pressed onto their skin, believing that God's protection would prevent frostbite. There is a strange story that before picking up a weapon, a man would urinate on his hand to warm it up. This is a practical yet embarrassing method. Historians have been debating just how effective these treatments are. Some people believe that animal fat provides a true barrier, reducing water loss and preventing frost. Others, however, believe that these practices are a kind of ritual, providing psychological comfort rather than physical treatment. It is certain that the cold doesn't care. It takes whoever it likes, whether it's ointment or spells. The sensory details leave their marks on you. The room was filled with the pungent smell of goose fat, mingled with the earthy smell of damp wool. The sounds of men rubbing, slapping, and cursing formed a strange chorus. What is more desperate than self-discipline is that when you touch your calf with your hand, you feel the blood stirring unwillingly, and the needles come back again. When you smile, your lips split open, because even if there is pain, it is better than nothing. The captain paced up and down the room, his eyes sharp. He scolded a person who had sat for too long. "Either go away or lose them," he roared, pointing at the soldier's toes. Everyone understood what he meant. No one wants to be that limping person, their severed limb wrapped in a dirty linen bandage. A comrade leaned towards you, muttering to himself. They say that a frost-bitten soul can do whatever it wants. Fingers, toes, ears. It's best to deceive them with extra cloth, so they chose someone else. You laugh softly, for superstition is sometimes more reliable than science. In the darkness, who can say that frost is not alive? Just think about how fragile and stubborn the body is. Even when the bodies turn black, people still keep walking and fighting. You saw them come back from duty, pale complexion, reddened, growling ears. However, they still carried weapons. Perhaps this is not courage. Perhaps it is merely because of the refusal to let winter declare victory. That night, you lay on the mattress, rubbing your hands over and over again, and willing to let them stand still. You hold them under your armpits, feel the faint pulse on your wrist, and then gently plead, "Don't leave me." Around you, men do the same. Each one guards their own body, as if it were the walls of a castle. The night thus passed, filled with restless movements, ointments, spells and low prayers. No one sleeps deeply. Everyone knows the truth. The enemy at the door is patient, invisible and ruthless. Its name is frostbite. It eats whatever it likes. The morning light was bleak and pale, and the sunlight weakly fell on the battlements, as if even the sun had no strength in winter. Use it up on the tray and twist your toes in the boots that feel as stiff as wooden boards. Every joint hurts. Every step makes a cracking sound when stepping on the straw, but life still asks you to get up. The limbs are the coldest. Always the hands and always the feet. If your fingers are frostbitten, at least you can tie them up and wave the weapon with the other hand. But if your feet don't work out, you're no use. Soldiers in the Middle Ages were well aware of this truth. Written records from the garrison log mention that foot care is an obsession, especially in the cold winter. Without steady steps, soldiers cannot climb ladders, cross ice fields, or stand guard for long periods. Shoes and boots are made of leather and usually lined with wool, but they are rarely waterproof. The trick is not to keep them dry, which is almost impossible, but to keep them warm enough so as not to lose their toes before spring arrives. As soon as you take off your boots, you'll smell the scent. The pungent smell of damp leather, sour woolen sweat that has fermented overnight. You have a worried look on your face. But this is the price of survival. Your hair is wet and the wool is stuck to your covers, which is unpleasant. Beside you, another soldier untied the cloth strip from his ankle. His foot was red and swollen, but fortunately it was intact. He muttered curses and rubbed vigorously, as if only anger could bring his limbs back to life. One strange practice often mentioned in less well-known materials is to wrap feet with extra rags or foot cloths. Soldiers lacking appropriate socks spread extra linen or wool strips around their toes to form a cold bandage. Some people stuff straw or moss into their boots as insulating materials, a trick borrowed from farmers and hunters. This wasn't glamorous, but it worked. Turn the boots into a rough stove within a few hours. Try it yourself. Stuff a small piece of hay into the tip of your shoe and ignore the itch. Modern researchers hold different opinions on exactly how effective these measures are. Some people insist that wood and moss play an important role in heat insulation and sight, well-minus preserved shoes stuffed with plant fibers found through archaeological discoveries. Others, however, believe that the dampness and pests brought by these materials may cause as many problems as they solve. Do soldiers benefit more from warmth or suffer more from wounds? The evidence does not provide a concise answer. However, a sensory attack is undeniable. You twisted your toes on the thorny straw, leaving red scratches but also absorbing heat. When you put on the leather boots again, they had become stiff from yesterday's frost. You stepped on them on the floor, trying to soften them and make them obedient. The sound echoed in the gun barrel, accompanied by the rhythmic slaps of other soldiers, just like the drum beat, resisting the rule of winter. A person beside him muttered, "Blisters are better than black toes." Another one grinned and pulled his second pair of hose onto the first one, boasting that he was the warmest. He smiled slightly at their jokes, knowing that humor is indispensable. Some people even say that men still wear boots when they sleep and don't want their feet to be exposed to the air. You shudder at the thought of this. Imagine that smell, but filth. But perhaps they are not wrong. Every minute without warmth is a gamble. Even the nobles who wore better leather boots would sometimes wrap their legs in excess fur at night and refuse to take risks. That morning, the captain inspected the garrison and loudly reminded, "Don't get your feet wet. Wrap them up. Keep moving forward." His voice was harsh, but beneath it lay a strange tenderness. He knew what frost could do. He had seen too many people limp into spring, disabled for life and never able to march again. He knew that a soldier without feet was not a soldier at all. When you step on your boots thoroughly, you will feel the warmth gradually build up, and your blood boils with each strike. His feeling is both painful and liberating, just like the needles of life struggling to move back. You know? And then smile gently, because it means you're still alive. You glance towards the door, where the threshold was covered with smoke. Another long night is approaching, but now you have won yourself a little time. Wrap your feet, tuck in your boots and tie up the rags. You have armed yourself and are ready to fight against the frost. When you put on your cloak and return to the yard, this thought lingered in your mind. Swords and spears can win wars, but socks are simple, rough, and woolen in winter. The days pass slowly, gloomy and peaceful, until the smell of firewood and bread pulled you to the center of the castle minus the kitchen. You follow your nose like a hunting dog through the winding passage, through a door, and warmth spills into the corridor like sunlight piercing through shadows. The moment you walk in, the world changes. The air was filled with the heat from the oven and the open fireplace. It forms a sharp contrast with the cold air currents in the military camp. Take a deep breath. For the first time in a few days, your lungs don't hurt anymore. The kitchen in the castle is still alive. The flames roared under the iron pot. The chef gave the order. When the meat slowly rotates, it spits out a stream. Fat dripped into the fire, hissing, and the room was filled with a pleasant aroma. The heat wave hit your face fiercely, and you almost forgot that it was winter. The off-duty soldiers loitered near the oven, pretending to help, but most of them were just wandering around, basking in the warmth like lizards basking in the sun on rocks. The records of this period describe the kitchen as the warmest room in the castle, second only to the fireplace in the hall. But unlike the hall, the heat in the kitchen is constant. I spent the whole day preparing food for hundreds of people. The oven bakes bread every day, the pot is stewing, and the fire never stops. For soldiers of low status, sneaking into the kitchen was both a practical act and a political one. As long as the chefs turn a blind eye, they will have a chance to spend this night more comfortably. You slowly approach the oven, stretch out your hands, until they suddenly feel the sting of life. When you lean against the stone, your back will feel warm, a luxurious sensation you haven't had since summer. You sighed, and the other soldier grinned too. Warmth seeps into your bones, untangle the knots in your muscles, and relieve the pain in your joints. Standing there, you almost fell asleep. This is a strange little detail that survived in the record. Some soldiers bribed kitchen workers with coins or other benefits, just to have the chance to spend the night in the corner. When frost turns the straw rays into icy and snowy stone slabs, even a patch of bare stone near the stove is worth the same weight of gold. In fact, there are stories of arguments about who was lucky enough to sleep closest to the oven. Some ended it with fists, while others ended it with laughter, depending on their mood and the amount of alcohol they drank. Of course, historians still disagree on just how widespread this practice was. Some people think that chefs guard the kitchen with great care because they hate soldiers encroaching on their territory. Others, however, believe that the lords themselves turned a blind eye to this, realizing that warm soldiers meant fewer hospital beds to fill. This is one of the uncertainties. The truth of each castle may be different, but standing here to feel the high temperature drive away frostbite, you tend to believe that men always have a way to sneak close to the fire. Are there rules or no rules? The sensory feast has overwhelmed you. The cracking of firewood, the hissing of grease dripping, and the rhythmic clashing of knives on the wooden boards all blend into a strange kind of music, comforting and vivid. The aroma is intoxicating, and the fresh bread crust has turned golden yellow. The onions sizzled in the butter and the meat was roasted to be edible. Your empty stomach is roaring, that even if you don't eat a single bite, the calories alone can nourish you. A comrade leaned against the stove, his cheeks flushed, muttering to himself, "Better than a down beg." You nodded, knowing that he was right. You changed rooms for one night with half of your salary. Soldiers have a strange custom of heating the stones in the kitchen before going on duty at night. These stones were wrapped in cloth, placed under the cloak or stuffed into the bedding, giving off warmth for hours. You've already tried once, placing a heated brick on your chest and struggling to walk against the wall. Although your fingers are still frozen, your heart feels protected. If you can steal the opportunity, this is a trick worth repeating. You watch the chef so busy and upset that you wondered if you could stay a little longer without being driven away. But even if they shout and scream, even if they wave spoons, you are still willing to accept the scolding. Every moment beside the fire felt like a stolen treasure. As night fell, the soldiers reluctantly returned to their rooms, complaining at the thought of going back to the strong drafts. You stood there for a while longer, recalling that feeling, the heat pressing down on your face, cigarettes curling into your hair, and the aroma of bread and grilled meat sticking to your clump. You know, when you lie down rambling again tonight, this memory will almost comfort you like a real flame, because in the castle of winter, warmth is far more than just warmth. It is survival, morale and hope, all of which have been branded into the bricks of the oven. Everything was hidden in the light of the kitchen fireplace. The heat from the kitchen will linger on your skin for a long time, even after you leave. But when you return to the military camp, reality will remind you of its hierarchy. Not everyone can fight against the cold equally. Judd and his officers sleep differently from ordinary people. You, wearing a straw hat and an itchy clunk, are just grateful for the chance to warm your feet. But up there, in the small room at the center of the castle, the officers were resting on feather beds. This is one of the established facts running through every chronicle. People of status sleep more soundly. The infantry in the castle listed down quilts, fur-lined quilts and feather mattresses, while the ordinary soldiers wrap themselves in wool. The beds of the elite class are padded, insulated and, most importantly, keep them away from the cold ground. Feathers keep you warmer than straw. When you lie on a musty sack, the fur covering it gives an unimaginable softness. You've never slept on a down bed, but you've heard enough of those who describe it. They say you'll sink in like a bird's nest, wrapped in warmth instead of getting scratched. No straw will pierce your skin. There are no fleas scurrying around your neck. There is no moisture in the stone, only softness, warmth and silence. They can't help but envy those officers who can close their eyes tonight and have such a comfortable time. One strange little detail mentioned in the family records is that some nobles' beds were too large and stuffed so full that they needed several servants to help them wash up every night. Imagine how absurd it is that when the person below is rubbing frost off their toes, they are merely preparing a mat. For soldiers, this kind of luxury is like a myth, an exaggerated story for entertainment. However, the inventory proved this to be true. Of course, scholars still have differences of opinion on just how common these feather beds are. Was there one for each officer, or was there only the lord and his closest companion? Some evidence suggests that small Guaranas used mattresses filled with wool, while only large castles boasted of down and fur. In any case, the gap between military ranks is quite obvious in terms of equipment and armor. A person's status can be measured by how soundly he sleeps. You roll onto the straw and feel it piercing your shoulder blades. This contrast is cruel. Around you, people are tossing and turning restlessly, scratching and biting things, muttering curses. Their beds are more like prisons than sanctuaries. You think of the feather bed above and wonder if those people still remember what it felt like to lie here, wrapped in the stench of mold and sweat. Your senses have betrayed you with fantasy, imagining the rustling of feathers beneath your body, the warmth wrapped around you, and the soft scent of flax washed with herbs. You imagine yourself lying there, the world becoming gentle, and all the cold things turning into memories. This is almost enough to make you smile, even though reality pierces your ribs, reminding you where you belong. A comrade gave a wry smile. They will snore like babies in their nests tonight. As he spoke, he pulled his cloak tighter. With us. We are geese without feathers. The men smiled, empty and sincere. Humor is survival. You won't fail to understand the symbolic meaning within it. Castles are used to display power. Even during sleep, this distinction is quite obvious. Gentle to the few, but tough to the majority. Perhaps this is necessary. Perhaps this is unfairness. You can't decide. What you know is that those who sleep on feathers wake up stronger, go further and complain less. Comfort is also a kind of armor. You'll never wear it. Close your eyes. The straw pricks you. Try not to think about what is on it. That image still exists, vivid and mocking the tall feather bed, the barricade blocking the airflow, the burning fire, the officers huddled in warmth, while you and your comrades cannot get through another night of straw, smoke and frost. When you finally fall asleep, you whisper to yourself, perhaps in the next life. The church bells faintly rang out on the stones, and each sound was drowned out by the snow piled up on the walls outside. You got up from the straw at once, stiff and tired. It felt as if the last echo had vanished and the silence had returned. In winter, religion will never be far from the hearts of soldiers. When the body is weakened, there are not enough clothes. Fire is salted meat. People turn to prayer. The chronicles of the monastery fully prove that the soldiers stationed in the castle, especially on long and cold nights, often persisted in holding ceremonies for comfort. In winter, the service time in the chapel is shorter, but more lively. People chanted hymns in low voices with chapped lips, and candles were lit on the altar even when fuel was scarce. The act of prayer is warmer than the spirit. It gathers people in a place with lights, sounds and companions. Loneliness, like frost, is a killer, while religion shapes patience. You pulled your clubbed iter and slipped into the church where several people were kneeling. The air is still cold and your breathing is still blurry, but the flickering of the prayer candles and the rhythm of your chanting make you feel less primitive. The stone floor numbs your knees, but you welcome this pain as it relieves you from the pain in your bones. Strangely enough, some soldiers turn this kind of prayer into a ritual to express war. A legend that has been passed down is that men not only draw crosses on their foreheads, but also on their boots and gloves, seemingly to protect their limbs from frostbite. Some people murmured incantations that blurred the line between religion and superstition, such as calling on saints to warm their blood or rubbing their hands while reciting scriptures. Though it sounds strange, repetition itself generates heat. No matter how mild they are, historians have so much disagreement on true beliefs. Some scholars believe that these rituals have profound spiritual significance and are soldiers' prayers to the gods for protection. Others, however, believe that this is a form of practical psychology, a way to materialize fear and a way to turn despair into a ritual. Perhaps both are correct. When you kneel in the dim little church, you will feel that faith and existence do not need to be separated. They are intertwined and support each other. The sensory world of a church is different from that of the military camp or a hall. You hear the low murmur of voices, the crackling of candles against the wind, the hollow echo of breathing on the arched stones, the mixed smell of beeswax and damp wool, and the faint sound of old prayer books. Your fingertips caress the rough texture of the wooden stool. The fragments grasp your skin, grounding your body, even as your lips move in prayer. A soldier beside you, with his eyes closed, whispered fiercely, "Saint Martin, more my feet," just as you once gave half of your cloak to a beggar. Another person held the rosary tightly, and the rosary left indentations on his palm. You watched quietly, not knowing if the saints really heard, if heaven could favor those who shiver behind the stone wall. But you will notice some subtle things. The act of praying itself will make you warmer, not physically, nor in any measurable way, but in the way your shoulders relax. Your heart beats steadily. Your mind has relaxed its control over despair. It's still cold, but it doesn't feel so personal anymore. It's not like a predator is following you. For a moment, you felt protected. In hindsight, it is easy for people to mock these rituals. Some modern writers consider this superstition, a dispersion of genuine solutions, such as cloaks and braziers. However, in the silence of this church, you became aware of the truth. Fault is part of survival. Faith, whether it is in saints, talismans, or rituals, will prevent you from submitting. In the winter fortress, the surrender of the spirit is the first step towards the death of the body. You lowered your head and whispered the words that you half believed and half hoped existed. The candles crackled and wax gathered on the altar. Their flames were no stronger than the ones you blocked on the wall a few days ago, but they were burning. Just this alone felt very magical. After the prayer was over, the men lingered there, unwilling to leave. They know that the cold outside is waiting for them. Finally, the chapel was empty and you walked into the corridor again, your cloak pulled tightly. The first breeze immediately met you, gazing at your cheek, but the echo of the singing still echoed in your ears, calming you down. You smiled slightly, your split lips stinging, and whispered, Amen. When you returned to the military camp, the echoes of the church still lingered in your ears. The hymns gradually faded away, replaced by the groans and mumbles of the soldiers as they prepared for another cold night. However, some things have changed. After the prayer, after praying to the saint and lighting the candles, the conversation around the tray turned to amulets and even stranger things. This is a well-known evidenced fact that medieval men, even those immersed in Christian rituals, carried ancient superstitions, such as wearing more layers of clothing. In the castle, soldiers nailed bones or herbs into their cloaks, murmured incantations, or wore amulets strung with ropes under their corse. The belief in cultural relics and amulets is not separate from religion but coexists. Part is despair, part is tradition. If a piece of parchment with the name of a saint on it can keep your fingers glued to it throughout February, why not believe it? Use it cross-legged on your tray, and the companion pulls out a small bag from his belt. He devoutly opened the box, revealing dried rosemary and sage. It can drive away the ghost of frost, he said as he threw a pinch into the brazier. The vanilla crackled, giving off a pungent cigarette smell that drowned out the stench of damp wool. The others nodded solemnly, as if only the smell could drive away the cold. In the smaller chronicles, a strange practice was mentioned. Soldiers sewed tiny metal crosses onto the pleats of their cloaks, so that no soldier could sneak in without encountering divine resistance. Some people tied fragments of wolf fur to their wrists, believing that the power of the wild beast had been passed on to them. There is even a legend that people put the knuckle bones of animals in their pockets and shake them like rolling dice to drive away frost. This sounds strange, even funny, but when your muscles are numb, you will stick to anything that is helpful. Scholars hold different opinions on whether these charms are universal or isolated quirks. Some people think that this is very common among ordinary soldiers, many of whom come from rural areas immersed in folk beliefs. Others, however, consider them rare, ridiculed by more devout people, and can only tolerate them in silence. These records are fragmented, but one thing is certain: where suffering is constant, superstition is always rampant. The sensory details in the military camp tonight are very vivid. You smell the pungent odor of burning herbs. I feel the cigarette stinging your eyes. You hear the rustling sound of the fabric. For men are just amulets hidden beneath the layers. The jingling sound of coins or ornaments tied to a leather string. A soldier opposite you muttered in a low voice, words you don't quite understand, half prayer, half incantation, rubbing hands lightly as if the words themselves could generate heat. You touched the inside of the cloak with your fingers, where a small wooden token was swaying back and forth. It was just a carved disc with a rough sun engraved on one side, given to you by a villager before you went to the garrison. You've never really believed it, but tonight you held on tighter than usual. The wood is warm because of your body and smooth because of months of handling. In your mind, you hear the voices of the villagers. The sun will never leave you. This is stupid, you tell yourself. However, when your teeth stop quivering, you will doubt whether the belief itself will warm you. A soldier laughed, breaking the atmosphere. He lifted a rabbit's foot and shook it around so that everyone could see it. "This is my umbrella," he said with a smile. Everyone else was groaning. Some found it amusing, while others were very annoyed. "It's best to roast it for dinner," someone retorted. The laughter, though very faint, livened up the atmosphere. Even ridicule is part of survival. It acknowledges the absurd, making it easier to carry. However, it also has a dark side. You have heard the soldiers' whispers. They believe that a curse will follow them in winter. A broken sword, a tattered boot, and coughing non-minor stock. Everyone was accused of not wearing the amulet or losing it. When their trinkets break or disappear, some people fall into despair. Faith can comfort people, but it can also consume them. However, you cannot deny this collective effect. The barracks felt warm tonight, not because the brazier was burning brighter, but because everyone was holding on to hope. The air is filled with the story of the sage walking barefoot in the snow, the charm that emanates when frost comes, and the lucky token passed from father to the son. You listen, half skeptical, half longing, because the story itself is insulated. They fill the empty moments, drive away loneliness and make the cold seem less absolute. When you lie down, still holding the token in your hand, you think of the boundaries between prayer and superstition, religion and magic. Perhaps the root is not important. Perhaps survival does not lie in the truth, but in what can keep you alive until you see the thunder god. You close your eyes. The smoke still stings them. The last thing you smell is the rosemary gradually disappearing in the ventilation. Somewhere outside, snow is quietly falling on the battlements. In your heart, you dream of the charm that shines in the darkness, and their warmth is as real as fire. The next night, the snow was falling very high on the outer wall, piling up in a heap like whites and dunes. The air is so pungent that every breath feels like swallowing a needle. You cross the yard, your boots creaking, and saw a small group of soldiers doing something strange. They dug a hole in the snow with their bare hands and helmets on. At first you'll laugh. They must be crazy. But when you get closer, you will discover the truth. They are looking for shelter. This might sound counterintuitive. However, in medieval records, there are sporadic references indicating that soldiers used snow as an insulating material. The Chronicle of the Nordic Campaign describes that when the wood for building cottages was scarce, people would dig holes while drifting. Even without scientific understanding, they instinctively knew that pockets in the snow could retain more body heat than those exposed to the wind. Cloaks spread out in snow caves, or shallow pits surprisingly relieve the cold air. You climb into one of the caves after the others wave to you. The world is changing rapidly. The wind is very stuffy. Silence is like a thick curtain that wraps you up. Although the floor is still very cold, the air no longer bites your face. You blinked in surprise, realizing that the snows from our enemy now felt like an ally. The men bare their teeth at your expression. Someone murmured that there was a layer of frost to keep warm. Strange anecdotes confirm this practice. Some soldiers even spread the straw or moss they picked up from barns in the snow sheds, turning them into simple igloos. Others set up small fire basins at the entrance, carefully preventing the roof from melting, but still enough to make the air a little warmer. This kind of originality may seem absurd to outsiders, but to insiders, it is a smart necessity. Historians still disagree on how common this kind of snow shed was. Some people believe that this was a desperate measure only used in the distant North or in the Battle of Yamaguchi. Others, however, believe that they may be more widely distributed and suitable for areas where the supply of wooden fuel is insufficient. The truth is hazy, but tonight, huddled in a valley, concealing the howling of the storm, you have no more doubts. The sensory changes inside the snow cave are astonishing. You hear your breath resounding in your ears, and each exhalation is enveloped in the air. The snow wall glowed faintly under the torch, blue and silver intermingled, as if you had already climbed into the moon's belly. The smell here was sharp and clean, with nothing but frozen air, in sharp contrast to the smoke-filled military camp. Your fingers caressed the cold wall, smooth and solid. You were amazed that such a cold thing could also protect you. A comrade beside you is snickering. It feels like a grave, doesn't it? But at least it's warmer than the wall. The others laughed nervously because not everything he said was wrong. This void was like a tomb, closed and silent, but the warmth of the corpse inside made it feel less like death, more like a strange rebirth. You sat side by side with the men, your cloaks folded together and your boots close to each other. Snow was pouring in from all directions. However, it is not crushing but protecting. You know this paradox. What kills you in public can protect you underground. Nature itself offers both enemies and allies, depending on how you deal with it. A soldier mumbled, a superstition. Vaizu remembered who was lying inside. Treat it well and it will care for you. Curse it, and it will bury you. You tremble not only because of the cold, but also because of the bizarre poetry in your thoughts. You patted the wall gently, half mocking and half serious, and said softly, "Be kind." Of course, this also has its drawbacks. Moisture seeped into your water pipes and your boots felt wetter and wetter. You move uncomfortably, knowing that you will pay the price for it later. However, compared with the cold wind outside, the dampness here is still bearable. You find yourself hypnotized by the dull silence, the steady breathing of your companions, and the faint glow of the snow wall that flickers like stained glass. Later, when you crawl back to the military camp, the man will laugh at your story. They claimed that sleeping in the snow was simply crazy. However, When they see the calmness on your face and the ease with which you move, some people will start to have new doubts about the floating objects outside. Perhaps more people will try tomorrow. When you curl up in the haystack, you will recall a lesson the snow taught you. Survival does not always struggle against bad weather. Sometimes it's about listening, adapting, and letting the cold be your refuge. The next night, the barracks felt tighter than usual, crowded with corpses and suppressed coughs. You were half asleep and half awake on the haystack when suddenly a soldier burst in. The boots were covered with snow, the cloak was stiff, and the expression on his face was very strange. He is not alone. He led a horse past the bride and coaxed it into the bridal chamber with gentle words. Those people cried and laughed, but no one saw him off. Everyone knows why he did that. Horses are not merely means of transportation in winter. They are stoves with hooves. Their huge bodies give off heat. The air they exhaled gave off steam in the cold air, and their skins pressed tightly together, feeling warmer than any cloak. The chronicles of medieval battles mention that soldiers lay beside their horses on painful nights, especially when they were captured outside the city walls. In the castle, although rarely, desperate defenders sometimes let animals into the rooms to share the warmth. It's dirty and stinky here, not at all decent. But freezing to death would be the same. You approached slowly, and curiosity overcame hesitation. At first, the horse moved nervously, its hooves hitting the stones with a clicking sound. But soon it lowered its head and submitted to this strange companion. The soldier who brought it knelt down, stroked its neck, and then lay on its side, covering himself with his cloak like a blanket. This scene is both absurd and touching. A person snuggled up against an animal as if it were his shared bed. There are some strange stories about this practice. There is a story that describes the soldiers of Yamaguchi crawling around under their horses, keeping warm close to their bellies, while the snow buried them all. Another account holds that the knights rested their heads on the horses' necks and whispered prayers to the horses' patron saint Street, the Eligius, as if asking the animals not only to share the heat, but also the endurance. These might sound a bit exaggerated, but the principle is reasonable. Few things in winter can exude vitality like living beings. Today's experts have not fully agreed on how widespread this situation is. Some people think that this is very common among cavalry, who regard horses as both companions and tools. Others insisted that this was a last resort and unwelcome in the castle, but could be tolerated in an emergency. Anyway, the smell of cold onion hay in the room tonight is beyond doubt. When frost threatens fingers and toes, people will put aside their pride and curl up on wild beasts. The torrent of the senses is immediate. You smell the strong musk emanating from the horse sweat, mingled with the smoke rising from the brazier and the soreness of the wool. You can hear the steady breath coming from the open nostrils, the sound of hooves moving on stones, and a low rumbling in the stomachs of animals. You pressed your hand against its side wings, and it was astonishingly hot. It was a steady, pulsating warmth that no blanket could replicate. You relaxed by the soldier's side. At first you were very uncertain, but soon you felt comforted. The horse twitched its ears but remained unmoved, then sat down. You lean your cheek against its side, and the thick fur scratches your skin. But you don't care. Warmth spreads across your face, passes through your neck and enters your chest. At that moment, you can almost believe that the animal knew what it had given you. A comrade told a joke. Be careful not to snore with it. Laughter rippled, faint but genuine. The tense atmosphere eased. For a moment, the cold didn't seem so intense. You can imagine the barracks full of people huddled around animals. A strange way of survival. Perhaps this is not common, but it is easy to imagine during the darkest months. However, there are also some shameful aspects in this. Castles are symbols of human power. Walls, towers, and fortresses. All of these were built to fight against ancient enemies. But when the severe winter comes, people crowd around wild beasts like children. Pride vanishes in the face of need. Close your eyes and think. Horses don't care about rank, don't care about war, and don't care about survival strategies. It just lives, breathes, and keeps warm. Perhaps this is why it makes you feel so comforted. As you gradually fall asleep, you will hear its heartbeat rhythm ringing in your ears, as steady as a drum, slower than yours, stronger and more down -to earth. Outside, the snow was pounding fiercely against the walls. The wind howled through the arrow crevices, and frost crawled over the stones. But here, close to the animal's body, you will feel protected. Perhaps tomorrow this horse will be led back to the stable, and its warmth will be replaced by straw and a cloak. Perhaps the captain would scold the soldier for dragging it in. But tonight there is a living stove beside you. This time, you believe that your fingers and toes will be intact when you wake up. By morning, the warmth of the horse had faded away, leaving only the smell of horse dung and a dull pain in its back that had been pressing on its waist while it was sleeping. Nevertheless, you are still grateful. When you test them, each finger and toe will still swing. But a new problem awaits us, one that will never take a break, not even the frost summoned by nature. When needed, you let out a deep sigh, for the thought of leaving your bed, braving the cold corridor and struggling to reach the toilets is itself a torment. The long robes of the castle guards, those protruding stone rooms, protruding from the small hills or the trees, are as ruthless as the battlements. In summer they froze to death in winter. The seat is merely a stone slab or a wooden board with a hole in it. Tonight, the thought of sticking your skin to the ice and snow makes you shudder. Castle records and archaeological excavations have confirmed this simple fact. These trees are functional, but very cruel. Waste flows directly into the pits or waterways below, carrying the stench far away. In cold weather, waste will solidify and form icy condensates, which makes it even more unpleasant to use. The soldiers secretly joked that one person might be frozen in the seat and have to be removed. That's not the case. One of your comrades minus arms whispered a trick passed down from the garrison. Heat a stone by the fire and then briefly place it on the seat before using it. This is a smart idea, although there is a possibility that the stone will crack or the wood will be scorched. Another person squatted in the straw of the stable and swore, claiming that the smell there wouldn't get worse and the animals wouldn't judge. You smiled, but this thought still tempted you. Travel records tell us some unfamiliar customs. Some soldiers moved their night pots to the corners of the barracks on cold nights. They preferred the stench indoors to the frost outside. Others leaned against the wall and hurriedly crawled into the snowdrifts. There is even a strange record a commander found that someone had dirtied the yard. Although in fact, when frostbite is more serious than discipline, punishment is often overlooked. Modern historians hold different opinions on the tolerable extent of these conditions. Some people think that the soldiers merely took on the responsibility of using the toilets, considering it another hardship of the garrison life. Others, however, stress that in cold months chronic diarrhea, tooth decay and infections are bound to worsen as men do not wear guard suits at all but stay indoors temporarily. The truth is likely to be tenacious acceptance and cold improvisation. The sensory experience is unforgettable. You have to make a long journey to the toilet tonight. Wrap your cape tightly and hold a torch in your hand. Air is fragile and can tear your lungs apart when you breathe. The snow creaks beneath your feet until you reach the small tower where the garden robes are kept. The first thing you smell is a putrid and sour odor, which can be detected even in frost. Then came the chill. The seat is frozen close to your thigh. It's caged you so much that you panted loudly. Your skin will sting, burn and then become numb within a few seconds. You gritted your teeth, finished eating quickly, and then jumped up, as if a stone had bitten you. Back in the barracks, you heard the laughter at a group of people who knew where you had gone. Lost anything? One of them asked with a grin. Roll your eyes, but add their humor. In the winter of the castle, compared with frostbite, embarrassment is an negligible price. Superstition has even reached this corner of life. Some people solemnly vow that defecating facing east can keep them away from diseases. Some people also claim that spitting into a latrine can soothe those spirits that prevent frost. Whether foolish or not, such a habit gives men the illusion of a desire for control. Even rituals have power when the body feels most vulnerable. Back to your straw. You wrapped your cloak. Aisha muttered that you would try the stable trick tomorrow. As long as you can avoid that stone seat, that's fine. The castle may protect you from the enemy's swords, but in the face of the insults of winter nights, it shows no mercy. Day by day passed. Although your fingers and toes were intact, not every soldier was so lucky. Winter is not simply gnawing at the skin. It will seep into the lungs, bones and abdomen. Soon you will find that the military camp is not only filled with tremors but also coughs. At first it was just a background noise here and there, but within a week this sound would persist, reverberating in the room like a gloomy drumbeat. Medieval chroniclers often said that the number of winter garrisons who died of disease was as many as that of those who died of war. Due to the scarcity of rations, the soldiers' bodies were already malnourished, cold and weak, prone to fever, chest infections, and what they called malaria. Modern readers might call it pneumonia, bronchitis, or influenza. No matter what the name is, when people squeeze into a damp room, the air becomes polluted, and the smoke rising from the brazier pierces the lungs. It gives people a heavy blow. You lay in bed, pulling your cloaked iter and listening to the symphony of pain. He kept coughing, panting heavily, and his groans were drowned out by the wall. A soldier separated by two beds spat into the straw and muttered curses. Another person was lying there shivering, even though there were 3 blankets. His forehead was covered with sweat, but his lips had turned pale. The stench of the disease mingled with smoke and damp hay, giving off a shrill sour smell. You put the cloak against your nose, though it didn't help much. Strangely enough, some remedial measures are almost bizarre. The soldiers rubbed garlic on their chests, hoping that the pungent oil could drive away diseases. Some people chew mustard seeds, or drink hot beer with honey and vinegar, calling it a good medicine for chills. There is even a story that mentions that a man would stuff onions in his boots while sleeping, believing that this vegetable could pull fever down from the soles of his feet. Whether these methods were effective or not, they brought hope to people when medicine was scarce. Medical historians still have differences of opinion on the effectiveness of these practices. Some people believe that Honey Valley at least offers soothing warmth and moisture. Others, however, believe that most remedial measures are, at best, routine and, at worst, harmful. It is obvious that in the winter of the castle, diseases spread like wildfire. Shared bedding, shared bowls, shared breathing. Every attempt to survive brings about illness. You hear the doctor dragging his feet in. He is more intimidating than respected. There were small bottles of herbs in his shoulder bag. His cloak smelled of vinegar. He stared at the sick soldier's tongue, muttering that his body fluids were out of balance and prescribed him for bleeding. He made a funny face when that man pulled out a small blade, cut a vein and pumped the blood into the bowl. The patient moaned, too weak to protest. You want to know if he can survive. The voice of disease dominated the night. The coughing sound echoed in the rafters. The wet, creaking chorus seemed never to end. The men moved restlessly, covering their heads with cloaks, as if they could keep the infectious disease at bay just by the fabric. Whether you are awake or lying down, every itch in your throat makes you feel panicked. Is it just drying out or the beginning of something even worse? The fear of illness is far less than that of the cold itself. Superstition then emerged. A soldier was burning juniper branches on a brazier, and the air was filled with pungent smoke, claiming that it could ward off the plague. Another person tied a red cloth around his wrist, claiming that this color could make death pass by him. You roll your eyes, but a part of you envies their certainty. When medicine doesn't work, belief can serve as a shield. The sensory memories of tonight will be with you. The heat from the brazier struggles against the cold air current. The smell of a mixture of sweat and dirt. Every pause could be heard with strenuous breathing. You covered your ears with your hands, but it was no use. The disease will not stop. At dawn, one person's tray was empty. Wrapped in cloth, he was quietly carried to the church. Another victim of the cold hidden weapon. The military camp was silent for a moment. Then life starts anew. Boot stamps. The cloak was pulled tighter. The drill continues. But the coughing still persisted, reminding people that the real siege was not always outside the wall. Sometimes it's inside, crawling from one pallet to another, invisible, but ruthless. You exhale slowly and whisper to yourself, "Don't let it take me away." Cold may take away your fingers. Hunger may take away your strength. But disease, that's the thief you fear the most in this icy fortress. The coughing sound gradually faded into the background. You staggered into the yard again, longing for fresh air, even though it was biting like a knife. The castle itself seemed to groan under the weight of the severe winter. Every stone rhymes with frost. Each tower was covered with icicles, and every corner was filled with through winds. As you pace along the wall, you will realize how much the design of the fortress is against warmth. Castles are never meant for comfort. Records and architectural investigations clearly illustrate this point. They are defensive machines, with thick piles of stones, tall towers, narrow and sloping corridors, and funnels for intruders. The city wall held back the enemy, but also kept it down. Arrows can make archers fire, but they can also make the wind howl in. The high voltage ceiling looks impressive, but it emits heat upwards, making the people below shiver. In summer, these functions can still be tolerated and even useful. In winter, they turned the castle into a refrigerator. You are now standing under the arrow, with the wind howling through it, carrying snowflakes that sting your cheek. You curse softly. The people who design these functions work lean, not the ones on duty in January. The slits catches the outside world very beautifully, the white fields and the grey sky from perfect lines, but its real effect is to blow the cold air directly into the hole. The scattered notes at that time suggested that people worked around to soften these floors. Some lords ordered that blinds made of wood or leather be hung on the crevices in winter. Some people hung thick tapestries on the walls, not so much for aesthetics as for heat insulation. In the more affluent castles, the entire room is panelled with wood to reduce the coldness of the stones. But for soldiers, especially those living in public rooms, such luxury items are rarely seen. The travelled Irie mentioned a strange little custom people stuff rags, or even animal skins into the cracks of stones to block the wind. Some people vowed to pile up some spare shields on the wall and turn them into temporary barriers. This might seem absurd, but when another option is to freeze your bone marrow, pride doesn't matter. Modern researchers are divided on whether the interior of a castle is truly unbearable or merely uncomfortable. Some people believe that with fireplaces, braziers and ingenious curtains, many rooms can become quite warm. Others insist that the thickness of the stones and poor ventilation are destined to make most spaces always damp and cold. The truth may depend on resources, wealth and the stubbornness of those who endure it. However, the sensory experience is undeniable. You are now walking in the hall. Although the fireplace at one end is burning, your breath still lingers in the middle of the room, filled with mist. The stone floor sucks warmth directly into your boots, and every step echoes like passing through a grave. The air current wraps around your legs, and an invisible snake spirals upwards from the hidden crack. The roar of the flames is distant and cannot rival the cave minus-like space. A comrade made a gesture towards the high ceiling. The heat increases. We froze, he muttered in pain. You nodded because you felt it too. Warmth rises, out of reach, trapping you in the cold shadow beneath. Nevertheless, you will still be amazed by this paradox. These walls, used for protection, turn into tortuous things in winter. The same slit could deflect an arrow, but now it can make the cold wind blow towards your back. Those tall towers that should have been inspiring now echo like empty drum beats as the strong wind howls by. You know that castles were built to defend against sieges, not the seasons. You will think of those farmers living in low-thatched huts, with wisps of smoke rising from the rooftops, and ruins so small that they can be warmed by a pile of fire. They endure poverty, hunger and disease, but perhaps they won't shiver in your master's grand fortress like you do. You sneered at this irony. The great stone wonders of this era may last for centuries, but on a January night, you trade it for a farmer's fireplace. As night fell, the castle grew colder. The stone stalls the frost for a day instead of releasing it. You tightened your cloak, returned to the barracks, and heard the wind whistling through the arrow crevices above, like a flute played by a ghost. You talked to yourself, half joking and half out of helplessness. There are enemies outside the castle and soldiers inside. When you sit on the straw again, you will think that perhaps the true genius of survival is not the construction of the fortress, but the endurance of the people living inside. The city wall may be heartless, but the people inside are not powerless. Tonight, when the smoke from the fireplace rises lazily in the Holland, there is only a faint flame in the brazier. You will see the soldiers walking around purposefully. They pulled out thick cloth from the warehouse, shook off the dust on the woven curtains, and then dragged them towards the walls of the military camp. It took you a little time to realize what had happened. They are hanging tapestries. Castles are often hung on the walls, not only for showing off but also for survival, as they are well recorded in the heritage list. Tapestries are not merely decorations. Their function is like the insulation layer in the Middle Ages, trapping warm air and blocking the airflow that slips away through the cracks in the bricks and stones. The nobles commissioned the creation of huge and complex artworks for the hall, but in the humble rooms, even rough wool fabrics would be suppressed. The soldiers did not have extravagant embroidered hunting or scenes of saints. Sometimes they hung rough blankets or even redundant cloaks on the walls. Anything could form the barrier between the meat and the stone. You take the edge of a piece of cloth yourself and stick it on the wall. Another soldier nailed a wooden nail to the wall. When the wind slips in through the cracks, this fabric will churn, but once the wind is fixed, its penetrating power will decrease. The difference is immediate. This room will never blow frost directly into your bones again. A strange note was found in some family records, mentioning that sometimes herbs such as lavender, mugwort and rosemary were sewn onto the seams of the curtains. This was not only to smell the room, but also to prevent insects from nesting on the fabric. Imagine a wall that is both fragrant and practical. You can almost imagine that a noble room is glittering with colors and sweet air, while soldiers are making do with any tattered clothes they can find below. Experts hold different opinions on the effects of these hangings. Some people believe that they have brought about real changes, especially when used in small rooms in combination with copper rods and low ceilings. Others, however, warn that they only offer psychological comfort and act as a barrier, making men feel immune to the through wind when the temperature remains almost unchanged. You pressed your hand onto the fabric and felt that the wind had lessened and it was much quieter. Whether it's an illusion or reality, it can comfort you. As the curtains rose, the atmosphere in the military camp changed accordingly. The sound of the wind grew deeper, no longer whistling through the cracks but remaining as silent as a distant whistle. The room was filled with the smell of old wool, musk and earth, and every crease had a faint smell of smoke. The visual effect of the fabrics offers the rough stone, transforming the room from a prison into something like home. Even the sound effect has changed. The sound sounded warmer and less hollow, gently bouncing on the fabric, rather than reverberating on the bare walls. A soldier grinned and stroked the rough fabric with his hand. He joked that it felt like living in a noble hall. The others giggled, although that piece of cloth was not splendid. Despite this, the act itself still boosted morale. This time, they were not merely enduring the cold, they are fighting against it with their intelligence and wisdom. You will think of the noble hall, where tapestries stretch from the ceiling all the way to the floor, woven with bright dyes to depict scenes of war or romance. Those curtains are both displays of electricity and insulating materials. However, these worn minus-out blankets serve the same purpose in their own way. They claimed that men refused to fully submit to the seasons. When night falls, the difference between the two is astonishing. The military camp feels closer, warmer and less exposed. You lay on the straw, your cloak tightly wrapped, and for the first time in weeks, the wind didn't call directly across your face. This is not a luxury, but it is a kind of relief. Superstition has also crept in quietly. A soldier insisted that the curtains could not only trap heat but also ghosts, and the ghosts, wandering in the castle, hated passing through the fabric. Another person sneered, but then murmured that knowing what was between him and the stone, he slept more soundly. Whether it's frost protection or ghost protection, this fabric has earned its place. You fell asleep slowly listening to a softer sound. There was no howling wind, only faint whispers and the occasional crackling of the brazier. Your fingers brushed over the tapestry beside the bed, roughly touching your skin, and you smiled slightly. Who would have thought that a piece of cloth, no matter how ordinary it is, could have the feeling of armor? When you close your eyes, you will realize the truth. In a fortress built to resist the army, survival sometimes depends on the most humble defense: the blanket on the stones, the cloth for keeping warm, and those who refuse to yield. These curtains played a role in dispelling the wind and lowering the temperature, but another enemy still existed. Even in a room covered with cloth and heated by a brazier, the floor of the castle was merciless. Every step you take on the stone slab seems to be absorbing the warmth from your bones. When you lie down, the cold air climbs up from beneath your feet, like a thief. Tonight, the men decided to fight back in their own way. layer by layer. Inventories and excavations both indicate that the castle floor is covered with rush grass, strand, even reed and ats, and if possible, they change with the seasons. However, this practice is not merely for cleaning. Clean is a generous word. This is also a form of insulation. The scattered dry plants softened stones, absorbed heat, and theoretically absorbed some of the filth from daily life. In the noble hall, rush grass may be mixed with herbs, such as lavender or meadow to sweeten the air. In the military camp, soldiers make do with whatever they can gather, the straw in the stable, the branches on the riverbank, and even the rough bushes. You will see men dragging handfuls of straw into the room and covering them with boots, until the grey stones disappear under the golden carpet. The sound immediately turned into a rustling sound, a cracking sound, and a murmur beneath the feet. You grabbed a bundle yourself and scattered it on the tray. When the thorny stems formed a barrier between you and the stones, you felt a strange sense of victory. Strange records and letters and chronicles suggest that soldiers sometimes competed to see whose straw mat was the thickest. Some people even claim that piling up herbs in rush grass can prevent lice, although others joked that it just makes best smell better. A particularly strange detail appeared in a Frenchman's description. People sprinkle wine on the junkers to calm the polluted air. Imagine wasting precious drinks on the floor. Nevertheless, despair breeds creativity. Scholars are still debating just how effective the floor covering the subway is. Some people believe that since the cold still radiates upward, the insulation effect is very small. Others point out that if the layers are thick enough, plant materials can provide true comfort, similar to a country carpet. The several -inch thick compacted layer discovered by archaeology supports the view that at least in castles supplied by wells, the floor can be cushioned and warm enough to function. The sensory transformation tonight is undeniable. With every movement, the rush grass rustled, and the room was filled with the earthy smell of the fields. You take a deep breath and almost imagine yourself lying on the dry grass in the sun outdoors in summer. Even if the snow outside is hitting the wall, this illusion can comfort you. The sting on the palm was very irritating, but it was still better than the cold sting of a bear's stern. A soldier moaned contentedly and collapsed onto his bed. "It feels like sleeping on the grass," he said. Another one giggled foolishly and grabbed his own ankle. A meadow full of fleas. Laughter reverberated in the military camp. For a moment, the feeling of coldness had already faded away. You lay on your own bed, pressing your cheek against the floor covered with straw. This warmth is not overwhelming, but it is genuine. Your body won't tense up because of the cold. Even your breathing feels more stable and less rough. You are amazed at how such a simple and humble thing can change the way of a night. Superstition even exists here. One person insists that sprinkling some herbs and rush grass can prevent diseases, and rosemary on the floor can strengthen the lungs. Another type of dog uses straw to absorb nightmares, trapping them like traps so that they cannot crawl into the sleeper's brain. The military camp was filled with such whispers, half mocking and half sincere. Close your eyes, smile slightly, and decide whether they are true or false. Tonight, you will believe them. The flame gradually died out, and the rush grass continued to work quietly. They softened their voices, slowed down their pace, and made the tough military camp less hostile. You wrapped your cloak tighter, felt the straw rustling under your feet, and then let yourself fall asleep slowly. Because in the winter fortress, survival does not always rely on swords or shields. Sometimes it's about the grass underfoot, carried in by tired people who refuse to let the stone win. Rush grass softens the cold floor. The tapestry blocked the through wind, yet the night continued on and on. The winter of the castle is not merely a battle against frost and hunger. This is a war against boredom. A person can endure a moment of cold and a moment of hunger, but despair seeps in faster than any gust of wind. Tonight, when the brazier gave off a faint glow, dinner was already over. Someone took out their spoils, another hummed, and then a third person joined in a drum made of a bucket. Soon, the military camp was filled with sounds. Chroniclers often point out that music and storytelling were the main intents of the life of the garrison troops, especially during the hard months. Records from castles across Europe describe bards hired to entertain their lords. The soldiers entertain themselves with rougher tunes. There are various types of songs, ranging from lyrical folk songs about taverns to semi-minor solemn hymns, praying to the saints for the arrival of spring soon. Telling stories fills the gap when tools are scarce. People recited stories of war, tales of heroes, or strange folk tales passed down from their villages. Words themselves are warmth, a shield against the silence of stones. Now lean against your try and let the sound wash over you. The strings of the spoils were rough, humming in the bit off minor ski, but the melody still remained. A soldier stomped his boots rhythmically, the straw under his feet crackling, and the others clapped their hands or sang along. The air became lighter and the barracks brighter, as if the walls themselves were getting closer. An interesting custom mentioned in the letters at that time was to improvise poems, mocking officers or hostile gargoyles. People sing the praises of the captain with a nose as red as a berry and the nobleman whose snoring is louder than a horn. Humor is sharp and sometimes caustic, but laughter forgives it. A few minutes later, rank disappeared. Everyone is just one voice in the choir of survival. Scholars are still debating the role of these pastimes. Some people claim that they are boring and have no real impact. Others, however, insist that they are indispensable and can keep morale high and prevent mutiny. The truth is very likely to lie between the two. A joke or a song can't cure frostbite, but it gives people the will to face another night. Sometimes willpower is more important than boots and cloaks. The sensory world of the military camp changed to the accompaniment of music. What you hear is not coughing and mumbling, but laughter, rhythm and the rise and fall of sounds. The flashes of the torches cast dancing shadows on the wall, turning the bare stones into a stage. The smell of sweat and smoke still lingers, but now it doesn't feel so oppressive, accompanied by the rhythm of clapping hands. You find yourself smiling, even though your bones hurt. Her comrade minus arms beside you began to tell a story about a knight fighting against an ice demon in a half-minus ruined half-minus false way. He only took a spoon he had brought from the kitchen. The men burst into laughter, and some pretended to wave the spoons as swords. Another story tells of a woman who warmed the entire army with a pot of meat soup. It is said that her pot would never be empty, no matter how many soldiers drank it. These are not history, but they are truths in a certain sense. Warmth, laughter and companionship can make people feel incredible. You noticed something else. The act of telling stories and singing itself is a form of physical exercise.